They were young, talented, hungry for success, but they didn't know the office wasn't just a workplace, it was a trapdoor. 10 men, 10 dreams, one fatal mistake. They got too close to the wrong woman. She was the boss's wife. Elegant, powerful, untouchable, until she wasn't. Some were used, some were framed, one was filmed, all were erased. This is not about love. It's about power, desire, and the cost of being chosen, then discarded. Welcome to the darkest corners of ambition, where passion becomes a weapon. And silence is the final sentence. 10 true affair stories, young men with the boss's wife. The city of Chicago buzzed with late autumn energy, a cocktail of wind and ambition coursing through its skyscraper veins. Somewhere within the mirrored glass of the Langford Communications building, Ethan stood frozen in the elevator, eyeing his reflection. His suit was borrowed, shoes scuffed, but his tie was perfect. Crimson silk, a symbol of hunger and hope. He had waited for this moment since college, a marketing internship at the most elite PR firm in the city. For someone born in the margins of Joliet, raised by a mother who cleaned hotel rooms for a living, this wasn't just a job. It was an escape hatch. The 24th floor opened with a subtle chime. Ethan stepped into a world so polished it almost felt fictional. Open spaces filled with tastefully minimalist decor, glass boards scribbled with million-dollar ideas, and assistants who walked like models straight from Milan. He felt small, and yet, wired with adrenaline. The first week passed like a movie montage. Coffee runs, color-coded reports, long hours of shadowing mid-tier managers. He spoke little, but observed everything, especially the invisible hierarchy no one mentioned, but everyone obeyed. At the top of that pyramid stood Edward Langford, the 50-year-old CEO with silver hair and a voice that could silence a boardroom with a single syllable. He rarely spoke to interns. When he walked past, silence followed. Ethan noticed how even department heads adjusted their postures when Edward appeared, like children before an exacting father. But it was the woman who sometimes stood beside Edward that truly disrupted Ethan's focus. Clarissa Langford. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever encountered. 38, with an ageless beauty that felt both dangerous and magnetic. Long dark hair always perfectly arranged. Tailored dresses that hugged a body sculpted by money and discipline. And a gaze that didn't just look, it dissected. Clarissa was the company's creative director. Edward's wife. The queen to the king. On the third Thursday of Ethan's internship, the company hosted an internal pitching competition called Next Wave. Young employees, interns included, were encouraged to present original branding concepts for a struggling client. Ethan worked on his alone. Nights spent in his shoebox apartment with a second-hand laptop, fueled by ramen and the echo of his mother's voice telling him, "Don't let them think you don't belong." He entered the room with shaky confidence, clutching a USB drive like it was a sword. The judges were already seated. Department leads, 2 senior partners, and her. Clarissa Langford sat in the center, legs crossed, pen poised, unreadable. He began his presentation. His voice stumbled at first, but found its rhythm as he began describing his strategy. He avoided eye contact until he couldn't. Clarissa's eyes met his, locked, and something subtle shifted. She didn't blink. She smiled, not the kind given to interns, but something more, amused, intrigued. When he finished, silence hung for a moment, then a slow, deliberate clap from her. "Well, someone did their homework," she said. "Tell me, Ethan, do you always think 3 moves ahead?" He smiled, unsure how to respond. "I try to." She wrote something down and said, "Join the Next Wave incubator group. I'd like to see where your instincts go." He nodded, holding in his shock. The room moved on, but Ethan's world had tilted. That night, he stayed at the office late, too wired to go home. Around 11:42 p.m., his phone buzzed, an internal email. Subject: Feedback. From Clarissa Langford. To Ethan Morales. "Good work today, Ethan. You have potential. Looking forward to more ideas." He stared at the message. Short, professional, except for the smiley face emoji at the end. The next few days blurred into tension and anticipation. Ethan caught glimpses of Clarissa in hallways, meetings, and lounges. She never addressed him directly, but her glances lingered a breath too long. During a brainstorming session, she brushed past him, her hand grazing his lower back in a way that felt accidental but wasn't. Then came the second email. Subject: Creative Coffee. There's a new cafe on Randolph. Quiet, good for ideas. Tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Hot beverage. He stared at it for an hour before replying. Sure, happy to share some concepts. The cafe was dim, intimate, lit by warm Edison bulbs and jazz that whispered more than played. Clarissa wore a deep blue coat and crimson lipstick. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. She was already there. They didn't talk about work. Not really. She asked about his life, his past, his ambitions. He answered cautiously, unsure of the rules of this game. You're not like the others, she said, twirling her spoon. They either grovel or boast. You observe. That's dangerous, Ethan. Dangerous? He laughed nervously. For people who don't want to be seen. She stood to leave 20 minutes later, placed a hand lightly on his forearm. Let's keep this between us. For now. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he was sure it wasn't innocent. By the end of the week, Clarissa sent him a design deck and asked for his input. It was a Sunday night. Clarissa: Which font speaks confidence? Ethan: Also, what do you think of this red? Too bold, fire. Ethan: I think it demands attention. Clarissa: Like someone I know. His heart raced. The bait had been cast. And he, hungry, ambitious, naive, had already bitten. Blank, underscore, blank. I thought I was just getting promoted, not propositioned. The city of Chicago had dressed up for the evening, every window a lit promise. Every avenue wet with recent rain reflecting the fire of downtown lights. Ethan stood by his 6th-floor apartment window, barely noticing the sirens below. His attention locked on his phone screen. The message had arrived 10 minutes ago. A photo, 2 dresses. The first was sleek, emerald satin, long and elegant. The second, a black velvet off-shoulder that clung like a second skin. Below the image, which one's more dangerous? Followed by a winking emoji. He stared at it longer than he should have. Then typed, the second one would stop traffic. Her reply came instantly. Good, that's the point. See you at the gala. The Langford Foundation Gala was an annual spectacle, and this year's was hosted at the Lyric Opera House, where old Chicago elegance met curated opulence. Ethan wasn't supposed to attend. Interns never were, but Clarissa had arranged it. Quietly, a last-minute name on the list. He arrived in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. Clarissa descended the marble stairs like a woman who knew the air shifted when she entered. And it did. Even Edward, cold and commanding in his tux, turned briefly toward her, but her eyes sought Ethan across the crowd, and for a second longer than necessary, they stayed. The gala blurred. Classical music, donors' laughter, glasses clinking. Ethan moved like a ghost at first, invisible among titans. But then Clarissa joined him at the bar, a half-filled flute in her hand. Relax, she said, her perfume too close. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. I'm trying. She tilted her head. Try harder. They danced. Once, her hand in his, gloved and firm, her hips close, her voice brushing his ear with every exhale. Edward was across the room, deep in conversation with a senator. Later, she whispered, Edward's leaving early, dinner with the mayor. Ethan blinked. You're not going with him? Her smile was slow. No, he's used to that. The ride to the hotel was silent. They shared the backseat of a town car Clarissa ordered. Ethan looked out the window. She looked at him. Her knee grazed his. Inside the elevator, neither of them spoke. Clarissa leaned back against the mirrored wall, watching him with the kind of stillness that made time dilate. Ethan's hands fidgeted. Her gaze was steady. When the doors closed, she stepped forward. Their kiss wasn't sudden, it was inevitable, deliberate. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his body reacting before his mind could justify. In the room, the city disappeared. They undressed without ceremony, more like permission than passion at first. But the moment her fingers traced his jaw, when her mouth reached his ear, it stopped being a transaction and became something unspeakably electric. No dialogue passed, just gasps, the creak of a bed unfamiliar to them both, and the rhythm of two people trying to feel more than skin. Ethan's mind spiraled as he lay beside her afterward. Her head rested on his shoulder, her breathing calm, unfazed. He stared at the ceiling. What just happened? Clarissa answered without lifting her head. Something overdue. I don't. She turned to him. Edward hasn't touched me in years. Ethan, not really. I forgot how it felt to be looked at like a woman. He swallowed, guilt mixed with pride. He felt chosen, not used. She kissed his shoulder. Don't overthink. This was necessary. When he woke, she was already dressed. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor. She placed a note on the nightstand. Let's keep this productive. Smiley face. Again. Ethan sat up slowly, the room still thick with her perfume and something heavier, something that clung to his conscience like humidity. No one knew, or so they believed. But inside Ethan, a battle had begun. One half of him was thrilled, validated. The other whispered warnings he couldn't quite silence. The elevator ride down was lonelier than the night before. He checked his phone compulsively. Nothing. Back at his apartment, he stared at himself in the mirror. Same face, but something fundamental had shifted. The world hadn't changed. He had. Clarissa sent nothing for 2 days. Then a message. New pitch meeting next week. You'll sit beside me. Bring your instinct. Fire. He typed a reply, then erased it, then typed again. Of course. He hit send, and sat in silence. Outside, the city buzzed with noise. Inside, Ethan could only hear one voice. His own, and it was asking, was this power, or possession? No answer came, only the memory of her lips. And the silence she left behind. Monday mornings in Langford Communications had a pulse. Phones clicked, voices pitched at polite urgency, and the scent of Colombian roast clung to every floor. Ethan walked through the lobby not like an intern, but like a man who knew secrets. And he did. For weeks now, the game had evolved. There were meetings that ended late with just the two of them. Lights dimmed, office doors slightly ajar but never fully open. She would lean over his shoulder while he drafted campaigns, her hand on his back lingering longer than needed, her breath warming the edge of his jaw when she whispered, "That's bold, I like bold." They had a standing room reserved every Thursday at the Sentinel Hotel downtown. The concierge never asked. The room always smelled of lavender and leather. Ethan started bringing her gifts, a bottle of rare gin, a Mont Blanc pen, and once, a bottle of niche French perfume he couldn't afford. Clarissa laughed and said, "Spoiling me already? Maybe I like the smell of power," he said, but the line between admiration and obsession blurred fast. At work, Ethan began cutting corners he wouldn't have dared to before. He stopped showing up to group meetings on time. When asked for drafts, he deferred, knowing Clarissa would smooth over the delay. And she always did. He saw the way others looked at him. Half jealousy, half suspicion. A junior associate named Jeremy cornered him in the elevator one morning. "You know she does this, right?" Jeremy said, eyes scanning Ethan. "Does what? Build someone up, make them feel like they're special, then snap the leash. Just be careful, man. This place, it devours loyalty." Ethan laughed it off, but the words clung to him. He found himself craving Clarissa's presence more than he cared to admit. Not just the intimacy, but her approval, her authority, the way she could make a room pause just by entering it. He had never been around power like that. One night, as they lay tangled in hotel sheets, she ran her nails across his chest and asked casually, "Still talking to your ex?" He blinked. "Amanda, no. Why would I?" "Because you did, last Thursday, for 13 minutes. Starbucks on Jefferson, skinny vanilla latte. His blood froze. "Were you following me?" "Don't be ridiculous," she smiled, but her voice carried no warmth. "I just have access to scheduling platforms, HR data, and interns don't have privacy policies." He sat up. "It was just coffee. It won't be again." The next day, he cancelled drinks with his college friends. Turned down his mother's weekend visit. Clarissa began texting more frequently. "Don't forget our 8 o'clock. Wear that gray shirt I like." Or, "New cologne. Too much spice. Go lighter." What had started as seduction had become choreography. At work, he sensed eyes on him. Whispers. Once, he overheard a project manager murmur, "Sleeping your way up, still a promotion, I guess." It didn't help when Clarissa insisted he sit beside her in boardroom meetings. Or when she laughed too loudly at his jokes. When she touched his wrist in front of others. He tried to pull back. He avoided her calls for a weekend. Claimed he had food poisoning. She didn't reply. Monday morning, there was an envelope on his desk. Inside, a photo of them. Blurred, grainy, her hand on his chest. In the glass wall reflection, his face. Tilted in desire. No note. Just that image. That afternoon, she passed his desk, whispered, "You were sloppy. Room 1426 has a new camera. Didn't you check the corners?" He wanted to scream. Instead, he said, "Someone could use that." She smiled. "Someone already did." On Tuesday, she pulled him into the creative suite. No one else was around. They argued. He said it had to stop. She kissed him hard. They didn't notice the red LED light blinking silently above the ceiling beam. The security camera had been activated earlier that week. Maintenance logs never reached her desk. Not this time. That night, as they dressed, she leaned against the door frame and said, "You really should pay more attention to your surroundings." He looked at her, something cold settling in his stomach. "You knew?" She raised an eyebrow. "Of course I knew. Then why?" Clarissa moved closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because sometimes, Ethan, being seen isn't the worst thing." She stepped back, heels clicking softly. "Just not by you." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ethan in the fluorescent silence, pulse hammering like a warning bell. He thought he was playing a game of seduction. But she had always been the dealer. And the deck was marked long before he joined the table. The email arrived at 7:42 a.m. on a Thursday. The subject line was blank. The recipient, Edward Langford. The sender, an encrypted address. One that would later turn out to be untraceable even by the firm's internal cyber division. The file, a 10-minute clip from the security feed of the Creative Suite. It played without sound, but it didn't need audio to speak volumes. Clarissa's face, Ethan's hands, the clothes that came off like secrets, the mirrored walls capturing every angle with brutal clarity. Edward watched it once, then again, then a third time, slower. He did not blink, he did not shake, he did not even sigh. Instead, he picked up his phone and made a call to the head of legal. "Prepare a termination file for Ethan Morales. No severance, NDA enforcement, potential sexual harassment review, pull HR records." Quietly. Then he hung up. It took 17 minutes for Ethan to be summoned to the 31st floor. When he stepped into the boardroom, he found not Edward, but two lawyers and the VP of Human Resources waiting. One folder on the table. No one offered him coffee. No one asked him to sit. "This is your formal notice of termination," one lawyer said. "Effective immediately." Ethan blinked. "Why?" The lawyer slid the folder toward him. Inside, printed stills, black and white, unforgiving. Clarissa, half undressed. Ethan, undeniably present. The HR director's voice was neutral. "Inappropriate conduct. Breach of ethical policy." Did Clarissa say anything? Did she? The second lawyer cut him off. "Mrs. Langford has stated she was manipulated. That the relationship was one-sided. That she was under emotional pressure." He laughed, a bitter, cracking sound. "That's a lie. That's her formal statement." He reached for his phone. "I have messages. I can prove." The first lawyer raised a hand. Those messages are company property once sent on corporate servers. And disclosing them violates your NDA. It was over in 12 minutes. He left through the freight elevator. That night, an article appeared on a fringe business gossip blog. Then 2 more. The headline spun like rot. Intern seduces CEO's wife in Langford PR scandal. The article included anonymous quotes. Details only insiders would know. By morning, the story had hit Reddit, LinkedIn, and a mid-tier business magazine. Ethan's LinkedIn page received over 1.20 profile views. The comments section wasn't kind. Clarissa issued a statement that same day. I deeply regret allowing personal confusion to interfere with professional judgment. This incident has been deeply painful for me and my family, and I ask for privacy as we heal. The phrasing was deliberate. Victim language. Soft power weaponized. Her PR team curated a redemption arc within 72 hours. A planned podcast appearance was rescheduled. A charity campaign featuring Clarissa as a survivor of emotional trauma launched quietly the following week. Edward said nothing publicly, but inside the company, silence became steel. Departments were reshuffled. Projects Ethan had once worked on were handed off without comment. His name was deleted from presentation decks. Access badges reprogrammed. Even his company email bounced. It was as if he had never existed. Clarissa filed for divorce 1 week later. Her lawyer cited irreconcilable emotional abandonment. There were no public scenes, no paparazzi photos, no court leaks. Edward remained silent, impossibly so, but those close to him noticed changes. Meetings that ended 10 minutes early. A stiffness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He started arriving at work exactly at 8 a.m. and leaving at 6 p.m. not a second before. Not a second later. One afternoon, Edward entered the executive suite, paused by Clarissa's office door, and simply looked in. She did not meet his gaze. He turned and walked away. Later that day, Edward passed the office of the IT director. He asked one question. Did we ever identify the sender of that email? No, sir. The encryption was military grade, not internal. Edward nodded. Delete the file. From every server. The man hesitated. Sir, legal recommended keeping. Delete it. The following morning, Edward entered the office 1 hour earlier than usual. He walked to Ethan's old desk, which had been left untouched. Still, oddly, unclaimed. He unplugged the monitor, then the tower, then carefully wound up the cords, placed them into a box, and handed it to facilities. Recycle it. That was the extent of Edward Langford's retribution. No yelling, no lawsuits, just the clean, surgical removal of a virus from the system. By the time Ethan realized how swiftly it had all collapsed, he was sitting in a borrowed studio apartment on the south side, staring at a phone that no longer rang. No job offers, no calls from Clarissa, only silence. And on loop, in his head, the final words from the last message she ever sent. Let's keep this productive. Rain slid down the windshield like forgotten promises. The streets of Chicago were slick with it, glowing in the smear of red and white traffic lights. Ethan sat behind the wheel of his borrowed Toyota Corolla, the Uber app open on his cracked second-hand phone. A new ping, another ride. He swiped. Madison and Lake. He adjusted his baseball cap, pulled it lower. The beard helped too. He didn't look like the Ethan Morales on LinkedIn anymore. That man had disappeared 6 months ago. Now he was just David R. A name, a rating, a destination. The woman who stepped into the backseat wore a navy coat and earbuds. 30-something, business casual, likely from one of the towers downtown. She gave him a once-over in the rearview mirror. Then, just loud enough to pierce the hum of the car heater, she said, "Weren't you the guy from that PR scandal?" The intern. Ethan froze. The light ahead turned green. But he didn't move. "You know what, never mind. Sorry, wrong guy." He drove in silence, gripping the wheel tighter. His palms were sweating. He didn't say a word the entire ride. When she got out, she didn't look back. He parked near the lakefront after midnight. Waves slapped against the rocks with slow indifference. Ethan pulled out his phone. No new messages. He opened the archived folder. The one he told himself he would delete. Messages from Clarissa. The first one: "Good work today. Ethan, you have potential." That damn emoji. Then photos. A lipstick-stained wine glass. Her hand over his tie. Her in that black velvet dress. The one he said would stop traffic. And finally, her last words: "Let's keep this productive." He stared at them, not out of longing anymore, but confusion. Did she ever mean any of it? Did she ever feel anything? Or was he always just a pawn? Ethan turned off the phone. Sat in silence. He had no job, no friends. They stopped calling when the articles hit. No apology texts, no explanations, just distance. His mother tried to reach him once. He never called back. What would he say? That he got everything he wanted and lost it all in bed? The apartment smelled of takeout and despair. He drove 14 hours a day. Saved every tip. Told himself he was rebuilding. But he knew, deep down, he wasn't rebuilding anything. He was circling around a life that had spun out. Around a woman who had rewritten the rules of reality. Around a power he thought he could harness but never understood. He once thought she saw something in him. Now he wondered if she just needed a mirror. Every night, he asked the same question. Was he ever real to her? Or just convenient? In the mirror of his rearview, his eyes looked older, not wiser, just worn. The city moved around him. Taxis honking, lovers arguing on sidewalks, a man with a saxophone playing for ghosts. But Ethan, he was still, caught between what was and what could have been. He turned on the ignition again. Another ping, another ride, another stranger who wouldn't know who he used to be. And that, perhaps, was the kindest mercy left. He thought he was playing the game. He didn't know, he was the game. Lucas arrived at the sleek, glass-walled building on Fifth Avenue carrying a borrowed laptop, a zip-up hoodie, and the kind of hope only immigrants truly understand. He was 23, newly graduated from a university in Sao Paulo, and armed with an opt visa that gave him exactly 1 year to prove he belonged in America. 1 year to find sponsorship. 1 year to go from outsider to indispensable. The company was called Solvista, a San Diego-based tech startup that built real-time analytics platforms for renewable energy grids. Their mission statement read like something pulled from a TED Talk: empower, sustain, evolve. Their open-concept office glowed with ambition, plants hanging from reclaimed wood beams, espresso machines humming in the background, and meditation pods no one actually used. Lucas was hired as an unpaid IT intern, but the CTO had hinted that if he performed well, he could be brought on full-time. The HR representative mentioned potential sponsorship, if we have budget. It wasn't a promise, but Lucas didn't need promises. He needed a chance. By week 3, Lucas had become the guy people came to when their Zoom froze or their password expired. He smiled easily, worked late without complaint, and never mentioned that he was skipping meals to cover rent. He didn't wear ambition on his sleeve, but it pulsed in every quiet nod and every "I can fix that." It was on a rainy Wednesday, San Diego's rare melancholy kind of day, that everything shifted. A system-wide authentication bug locked out several key accounts. Lucas was called in to troubleshoot. He traced the error back to a misconfigured user permission folder connected to the executive admin's Google Workspace. One folder was unlabeled. He clicked it. Inside were several cached thumbnails. At first, it looked like corporate headshots, until he enlarged one. It was a photo of Veronica Reed. She was reclining on a white sofa in what appeared to be a penthouse living room, wearing nothing but a silk robe. Her hand rested on the bare chest of a man whose face was turned away, but whose body language made the dynamic clear, intimate, familiar. Not her husband. Lucas's heart kicked against his ribs. He didn't mean to see it. He shouldn't have seen it. He backed out of the folder, wiped the trace from the log file, and tried to steady his breath. But it was too late. An hour later, his Slack pinged. A message from an unknown username, REGR. Rooftop, 6:30 p.m. Come alone. He hesitated, wondered if it was a prank. But when he arrived on the rooftop deck, reserved for board meetings and high-level investor cocktails, she was already there. Veronica Reed. She stood by the edge, one hand wrapped around a stemless glass of wine, her coat loose over her shoulders like it had been draped, not worn. Her beauty was cold, sculpted, refined, the kind that didn't seek attention because it had never been without it. "You're punctual," she said, not turning. Lucas swallowed. "You messaged me." She finally faced him. Her eyes were gray, not soft gray, storm cloud gray. "You saw something you weren't supposed to." "I didn't mean to." "I know." She took a sip. "But now you've seen it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no script for this. No protocol. Veronica stepped closer. "Do you know who that man was?" Lucas shook his head. She smiled, tight and mirthless. "Neither does my husband." He blinked. "Relax," she added. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to assess you." "Assess?" She gestured to a second glass on the ledge. "Have a drink, Lucas. You've earned it." He didn't move. "I Googled you," she continued. "Top of your class. Migrated here on an opt visa. No family here. No safety net. You need sponsorship, don't you?" He flinched. "How do you know?" "I know everything about people I may need to use." The words landed like ice water. "I'm not trying to insult you," she added. "On the contrary, I admire resourcefulness, loyalty, discretion." He felt himself drift, despite every instinct warning him to leave. There was something magnetic about her, like standing too close to a bonfire. "It warms you before it burns." "I won't ask what you plan to do with what you saw," she said. "I already know the answer. Nothing. Because you're smart. You want to stay in this country. And I can help with that." Lucas's voice cracked. "What are you offering?" Her smile was velvet over steel. "Mutual benefit. A quiet understanding. You get a career, a visa, maybe even your own team someday. In return, you keep what you saw between us. And you make yourself available." He stared at her. "Available?" She didn't answer, just raised the wineglass to her lips. The wind picked up. The city buzzed below like nothing had changed. But Lucas knew something had. In him, around him. He nodded slowly. Veronica stepped past him, her perfume brushing his senses like a seal. As she reached the door, she paused. "You're too quiet, Lucas. That's why I chose you. You don't ask questions." He stood alone as the sun dipped behind the buildings. His hands trembling, his mind spiraling. He wasn't sure what had just happened. But he was sure of one thing. "I thought I was just fixing servers, not bargaining with secrets." The first message came at 10:38 p.m. on a Sunday night. "How's the cloud migration going?" V. Lucas sat up in bed, blinking at the screen. The question was technical, work-related, but the hour wasn't. He waited a minute before replying. "On schedule. The S3 buckets are sinking fine. Should be done by morning." Her reply came faster than he expected. "Good boy." No emoji, just those two words. Casual. Or maybe not. By the following week, her texts grew more frequent. Some still about work, most weren't. "Ever miss home? Who's waiting for you back in Brazil? You don't seem like someone who's ever truly belonged anywhere." That's not an insult. That's power. "I like your silences. They speak more than most people's noise." Lucas never knew how to answer. So he often didn't, but the messages kept coming anyway. Like waves reshaping a shoreline. The conference was held in a glass high-rise overlooking the San Diego Marina. It was the kind of event where everyone wore smartwatches. And the champagne tasted like technology. Lucas was only there to manage AV setups and troubleshoot any on-site glitches. That was the plan, until Amber, the CEO, rushed up to him near the end of the night. "Our driver's caught in traffic. Veronica needs to get back to the Carlton. Can you take her, just for tonight?" Lucas hesitated. Of course. When he approached Veronica, she was already waiting in the lobby. Her heels were off. She held them like weapons in one hand and a shawl in the other. "Uber Lucas, my savior." She smiled, slipping into the passenger seat of the company Tesla. The drive was quiet at first. She stared out the window, humming a tune he didn't recognize. "Ever wonder what would have happened if you never opened that folder?" she asked suddenly. Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "I try not to." She turned to him. "Liar." When they arrived, she invited him up, said it was only for a minute, said she had a bottle of something expensive and half-finished. Lucas hesitated in the doorway. The room was tastefully cold, white orchids, muted lighting, a skyline that looked too perfect to be real. She poured 2 glasses. "No ice." "You're stiff," she said. "I should go." She walked over, placed a glass in his hand, and said nothing. Then, as he reached for the keys in his pocket, she touched his wrist. "You don't know what you look like, do you?" she asked. He blinked. "What? So real, so unpolished. It's disarming." He didn't answer. She took a sip. "I could help you stay. You know, not in this room, in this country." Lucas looked at her, at the curve of her shoulder, the line of her collarbone, the glass reflecting city lights in her fingers. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say something righteous, or cautious, or at least professional, but he said nothing, and she kissed him, not quickly, not possessively, slowly, like she was daring him to stop her. He didn't. There were no words after that. No promises, no explanations, only the quiet unraveling of fabric, the rustle of breath against breath, the space between them collapsing like a soft implosion. Lucas didn't remember falling asleep, but he remembered waking up. The room was dim, a sliver of light peeked through the blackout curtains. Veronica was gone. On the nightstand sat a plain white envelope. Inside, 2 crisp $100 bills. No note, no name, just the money. He stared at it for a long time, then left it untouched. Back at his apartment, Lucas took a scalding shower, scrubbed at skin that still felt too much like hers. He told himself it was a mistake. One time, something to forget. But the next day, she texted him again. "Next Friday, room 1803, don't be late." No greeting, no context, as if they had a contract. And maybe they did. Lucas deleted the message, then undeleted it, then stared at it for 10 full minutes. He didn't respond, but he showed up anyway. He told himself he wasn't being used. He told himself it was a choice. He told himself he still had control. But every night, when he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same thought echoed like a heartbeat beneath the noise. Was this survival, or surrender? He didn't know. He only knew he couldn't stop. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she wanted all along. The Airbnb was always booked under the name Elena Carter. Same place, same room, once a week, every Friday after sunset. It was a loft tucked away in the hills above Mission Valley, far enough from downtown to avoid curiosity, but close enough to feel like a secret never too far from being found. The walls were concrete, the furniture all velvet and glass, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender and wine. Lucas stopped asking questions. He simply showed up. The first few times, she greeted him with a glass of whatever red was trending in the Napa circuit. Then she stopped pretending it was casual. No wine, no talk, just skin. Some nights she said nothing at all, just looked at him like he was a possession to be used. Then folded away, and yet he kept coming back, driven by something he no longer mistook for attraction. It was gravity, or maybe inertia. The email came on a rainy Tuesday. Subject: Offer of employment, Solvista Technologies. Lucas stared at the screen. Full-time IT analyst. Competitive salary. Relocation package. Visa sponsorship. He blinked twice. In the signature line, CC, Veronica Reed. He should have felt joy, relief, a sense of achievement, but the elation that rose was muted by a deeper sound, doubt. That night, she didn't mention it. She acted as if the email didn't exist, as if she hadn't moved the levers behind closed doors to make it happen. But as Lucas got dressed, she said, almost lazily, "You see, loyalty pays." She began texting him every morning. Before breakfast, before work, sometimes before dawn. Morning, Lucas. Did you dream of me? Why didn't you reply faster? Didn't like your tone yesterday. Delete that photo with Amanda. You don't need old ties. Lucas froze at the last one. Amanda, his ex, still in Brazil. They barely spoke. How do you even know about that? He texted back. No reply, only a voice memo 30 minutes later, her breathing first. Then softly, because you belong to me now. He didn't reply. She didn't need him to. 2 weeks later, he skipped a Friday, told her he had a server migration that ran long. A lie. He spent the evening alone in a 24-hour diner staring at his reflection in the silver napkin holder. She didn't confront him. She sent him a package. Inside, a burner phone and a note. For your eyes only. From now on, this is how we talk. He thought about ignoring it. He thought about quitting. Until his own work visa application status online changed from processing to approved. Veronica never said the words. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Everything you have now is because I allow it. Lucas stopped calling his mother. Not because he didn't miss her, but because every time he did, Veronica texted something chillingly well-timed, "Miss your mama today," or "Careful who you share your blessings with." He blocked Amanda completely, removed her photos, wiped his WhatsApp clean. Each concession came with its own quiet shame, but also a strange calm, like following orders in a prison too nice to escape. Then came the night he didn't mean to hear it. Veronica had gone into the bathroom of the Airbnb loft to take a call. Lucas was half asleep, shirtless, sprawled on the linen duvet. He heard her voice, distant but firm. "No, I don't care what she posts. I told you, let her play house for a few months. I'll drag the prenup out. Let the press cool down first." A pause. Laughter. "No, darling, he has no idea. He thinks I'm the one who was abandoned." Another pause. "Yes, Brazilian, pretty, smart, quiet, just the kind of distraction you'd appreciate if you were me." Lucas sat up slowly. Veronica returned 5 minutes later. Her face unreadable. He didn't mention it. He didn't need to. But that night, as they lay in silence, Lucas didn't sleep. For the first time, he saw the pattern, how he was chosen. Tailored again. Not loved, not even desired, just placed. She wasn't escaping a cruel husband. She was waging a war. And he was a pawn that fit the script. The next morning, as she zipped her dress, she kissed him on the forehead. "Don't fall in love with me," she said softly. "It'll ruin the story." He wanted to ask what story, but he already knew the answer. The one where she wins. And he forgets he was ever real. Lucas sent the email just after midnight. No subject line, just a single sentence. "This needs to stop. I'm resigning by the end of the month." He didn't expect a response. He didn't want one. For the first time in weeks, he breathed without checking his phone. He even slept. But by 10:06 a.m., the message came. From our formal, cold, "Please report to conference room C for a mandatory meeting regarding a personnel matter." The room was already occupied when he arrived. 2 people from Human Resources. 1 internal counsel. 1 woman from Compliance. They didn't offer water. They didn't ask how he was. They asked questions. Measured, documented, clinical. "Have you ever engaged in any inappropriate communication with Veronica Reed? Did you ever attempt to obtain benefits in exchange for silence? Do you understand the definition of coercive manipulation in the context of workplace hierarchy?" Lucas sat frozen, his mouth dry. The final document was on the table by noon. A typed complaint signed by Veronica. Dated that very morning. Allegations, persistent harassment, coercive threats, emotional instability, potential for reputational damage. His fingerprints were on nothing. But her name was everywhere. She said he pursued her. That he became obsessive. That when she denied him further contact, he threatened to release private information. Lucas tried to speak, tried to explain, mentioned the burner phone, the messages. But when he asked to show them, he found the phone bricked, reset, wiped clean. He reached for his Solvista email. Access denied. He pulled out his own phone. 3 unread messages, all from unknown numbers. The first was a warning. Let it go. The second, you were never supposed to be more than temporary. The third, a photo. Grainy, him outside the Airbnb. It was enough. By 3 p.m., he was walked out by security. No goodbyes, no explanations, just silence that hummed too loudly. 3 days later, a blog post surfaced on a tech gossip site known for taking down startups with loose ethics and looser NDAs. Intern attempts to blackmail tech angel investor. The article was unverified, anonymous sources, no names, but the details were sharp. A Brazilian intern, alleged manipulation, leaked screenshots, blurred, a photo of Lucas entering a hotel alone. Comment sections lit up. Another visa scammer. Power-hungry immigrant tries to play the game and loses. She's the victim. Always is. Lucas didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. When he did, he saw his face reflected in coffee shop windows and felt it twist in his gut. He packed in silence. 2 bags, 1 flight. Departure, San Diego International. Gate 46A. Destination, São Paulo. As the plane lifted above the city, Lucas stared at the skyline, the cranes, the solar roofs, the glowing towers that once made him believe this was where his life would happen. He remembered his first day, his hope, his quiet hunger. He remembered Veronica's hand on his chest. He remembered how she looked at him like a blank canvas, and how he let her paint him with disappearing ink. There were no headlines now, no protests, no second chances. Just the cold arithmetic of power. 1 accusation, 1 deleted message, 1 man removed. As the clouds swallowed the last glimpse of California, Lucas closed his eyes. Not in peace, but in defeat. He had wanted to belong, but he had never even been real to them. Just a placeholder, a distraction, an erasure waiting to happen. The humidity in São Paulo wrapped around Lucas like a second skin. He rented a small apartment above a closed bookstore. Its shutters rusted from years of rain. The Wi-Fi was spotty. The shower whined when turned on. But it was quiet, and it was far away. He worked freelance now, mostly coding back-end systems for clients he never met. Payments arrived through intermediaries. No names, just wallet IDs. He didn't ask questions. He didn't post online. No social profiles. No LinkedIn, no digital footprints, except the ones he couldn't erase. At night, he kept the curtains drawn. He had developed a habit of checking every email header for tracking pixels. He wiped his phone weekly. He never took video calls unless absolutely necessary. But they still came. Job interviews, rare as they were, always began the same, friendly tone, promising project. Then, always, the pause. One interviewer squinted at the screen, tilted his head. Didn't I see your face before? Somewhere in the States. Lucas didn't answer. He reached for the mouse and turned off his webcam. The call ended 2 minutes later. He didn't reapply. In the evenings, when the city fell into its usual noise of distant traffic and barking dogs, Lucas sometimes stared at the old phone tucked in his drawer. It was the one she gave him. The burner. He hadn't used it in months. But he hadn't thrown it away either. That night, he turned it on. The screen lit slowly, like a breath held too long. No SIM card, just offline storage. The messages were still there. You're different. You're mine. He stared at those 2 lines for longer than he should have. Then, with a flick of his thumb, he deleted the thread. It was gone, but nothing really left him. Not the sound of her heels echoing in marble hallways. Not the way she said his name like it was both a promise and a punishment. Not the look in her eyes when she realized he still believed her. He had tried to tell himself it wasn't his fault. That he was young. That he was manipulated. That he just wanted to stay. But some truths don't offer comfort. Only clarity. He hadn't been chosen. He had been convenient. She didn't fall for him. She fell into him, like one might fall into a lie to buy time. To redirect attention, to survive a season, Lucas walked the streets of his old neighborhood like a ghost that didn't want to be remembered. His mother still called. He always picked up, But he no longer shared much. What could he say? That the dream cost more than he had. That sometimes power doesn't destroy you with noise, but with precision, timing, and plausible deniability. That he had no proof, only memory. One night, he passed a sidewalk cafe where a TV played muted news footage. The camera panned past a charity gala in San Francisco. Veronica stood center frame, smiling, wearing white. Beside her, her husband. Reconciled. The caption read, "Power couple donates $2 million to underserved youth in tech." Lucas didn't stop walking. He never watched the rest. He never needed to. She had won. Again, he returned to his apartment, shut the door, sat in the dark. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was verdict. He thought he was playing the game. He didn't know, he was just the silence she needed to protect her image. Noah had never been in a room with that much marble before. The lobby of Ramirez's atelier was more art installation than office. Slabs of Carrara underfoot. Diffused lighting from a custom chandelier designed to mimic the veins of a leaf. And a scent, cedarwood and citrus, that whispered expensive restraint. He'd only been in Miami for 4 months. But the weight of ambition pressed hard on his back like the heat outside. He was 26, fit, sharp, with the kind of symmetrical jawline and sea-glass eyes that got noticed in a city obsessed with surfaces. But Noah wasn't here to be looked at. He was here to rise. To become more than just another design intern hunting espresso for senior staff. Victor Ramirez, the CEO, was a legend in the field, credited with reinventing coastal modernism, but he rarely made public appearances. His team said he preferred silence to small talk, results to promises. He was tall, slate-gray hair always slicked back, and when he walked into a room, people didn't breathe differently, they stopped breathing. Noah had seen him only twice in person. But Isabel Ramirez was another story. She was the company's public face. Once a model in Europe, now the firm's PR director and muse, Isabel had the kind of elegance that made people rearrange their postures. Tall, bronze-skinned, always in fitted dresses that hinted at motion even when she stood still. Her voice, velvet over ice. He had noticed her before. Everyone had, but she had never looked at him. Until the K event. It was a launch party for a private villa the firm had just completed on Star Island. The client, Mrs. K, was a billionaire widow with a fondness for marble, mirrors, and men under 35. Noah had been assigned to walk her through the layout renderings, an errand more for charm than design expertise. He did his job. He smiled, listened, laughed at the right moments, even when Mrs. K touched his wrist unnecessarily. And from across the room, Isabel saw it all. Later that night, as Noah was uploading post-event photos into the firm's Slack archive, a private message pinged. "Isabel Ramirez, you handled Mrs. K well. Very fluid charm." Noah stared at the message. The ellipsis was deliberate, the compliment ambiguous. A trap, a joke, a test, he replied, just trying to match the tone of the space. She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was only one word, noted. He didn't sleep well that night. Not out of guilt, out of curiosity. In the weeks that followed, their paths crossed more often. Brief encounters in corridors, shared elevator rides, comments left on project boards that felt slightly more personal than professional. Nice use of asymmetry, unexpected. Your lighting choices are getting braver. I approve. She never used emojis, but her tone carried more color than any icon could. Noah began to second-guess himself. Was she just being supportive? Or something else? He noticed the way she watched him. Not the way a boss observed progress, but the way a woman memorized angles. Still, nothing overt happened. The lines were never crossed. Only traced, slowly, with a steady fingertip. Then came the pitch meeting with the developer from Coral Gables. Noah had prepped the presentation himself. Burning through 2 weekends, he delivered it with confidence, clarity, and that undercurrent of playful charisma that clients seemed to respond to. Afterward, as people filed out of the glass conference room, Isabel leaned close to him, just enough that he caught her perfume. "You're wasted as an intern." He smiled, flattered, not knowing how to respond. She added, more quietly, "Let's change that." That night, he replayed that line over and over. Was it an opportunity, a flirtation, both? He had come to Miami for possibility. He hadn't known it would wear red lipstick and say things like "let's change that." 1 week later, another Slack ping. Late at night, no subject. Isabel Ramirez, "Do you like rooftop bars?" Noah, "Depends on the company." Isabel Ramirez, "Meet me at the alcove. 10 p.m. Wear something with confidence." He stared at the screen, heart thudding. Outside his apartment, the Miami night was buzzing with music, neon, and mistakes waiting to happen. He changed his shirt 3 times. By 9:59 p.m., he was already there. The alcove was dim, intimate, lit like a secret. Isabel was already seated, legs crossed, wine glass in hand, hair pulled back in a braid that should have been illegal. She didn't say hello, just gestured for him to sit. They talked, not about work, about Paris, about how glass reflects desire differently than mirrors, about favorite scents. Hers was vetiver, his was uncertainty. At one point, she leaned in and said, "You know this doesn't mean anything, right?" He said nothing, because he wasn't sure what this was. And then she smiled, not wide, but real. He left that night without kissing her, but every atom of him had already moved. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan circling like a question, he whispered to himself, "I thought I was just getting promoted, not propositioned." The air in Miami was thick with perfume and pretense that night. On the 29th floor of the Saffron Grand, the rooftop bar buzzed with a curated crowd, influencers, architects, boutique hotel investors, and designers in silk and intent. Among them stood Noah, lean in a tailored navy suit, eyes darting between faces, drinks, and shadows. He had been invited at the last minute, or so he thought. The official excuse was that he had made a strong impression during the design presentation for a new resort lobby. Unofficially, he knew Isabel had something to do with it. Her messages had changed in tone over the past 2 weeks. What began with comments about client handling now tiptoed into the personal. "What's a man like you doing single on a Friday night?" she had messaged last week. He'd replied with a safe quip, "Saving my charm for Monday meetings." But the next message, sent at midnight, was bolder. "Some of us don't like waiting." Tonight, her eyes found him the moment he arrived. Victor, her husband and CEO of the company, had made a brief appearance, gave a few curt nods, and disappeared, citing a video call with investors in Singapore. Isabel didn't seem disappointed. She turned her attention to the event, and to Noah. They mingled, slowly orbiting each other. She laughed at his remarks more than necessary. She brushed his arm when making introductions. And when most of the guests filtered out around midnight, Isabel placed a manicured hand on his forearm and said, "Stay a little longer, for optics. You're good with people." Noah didn't believe in coincidences anymore. In the elevator, the silence between them was thick. He stood beside her, her perfume pressing into his mind like static electricity. When the doors closed and the car began to rise, she looked at him. "Do you want to be remembered, or forgotten?" Her voice was low, nearly drowned by the hum of the lift. He turned to meet her gaze. Something about the question made his chest tighten. "Depends on who's remembering," he replied. They said nothing else. At the penthouse, she opened the door with a keycard and stepped aside. He walked in. She followed. The lights were already dimmed. Music played low from hidden speakers, something slow, sultry, unashamedly expensive. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. She stepped close. Their eyes locked. Her fingers moved first, touching the edge of his collar, trailing lightly, as if giving permission. He kissed her. There were no words, only hands, breath, the sound of her dress sliding against his shirt, the warmth of skin against skin, lipstick smudged onto his collar, perfume sinking into his pulse. He didn't ask if this was a mistake. She didn't ask if he wanted to stop. It was as if they were both actors reading from a script they hadn't written but knew by heart. Sometime in the blur between night and morning, he woke up to find her gone. But on the nightstand was a long, slim box wrapped in matte black paper. Inside, a Hermes tie in deep charcoal. A note, folded neatly. "Keep playing the part. You wear it well." Noah sat in the silence of that penthouse room longer than he should have. The air conditioning whispered. He thought about everything he wanted: to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. This tie was recognition. This room, this night, this woman, they were all validation. But even as he adjusted the knot of his new gift in the mirror, something inside him whispered back, "This isn't real, is it?" Still, when he stepped into the morning sunlight and hailed a cab back to his apartment, he smiled like someone who had won something. He didn't know yet what it had cost. The apartment in Wynwood wasn't hers. It wasn't his. It belonged to someone named Anna Delcroix, a name that didn't exist outside the lease. It was tastefully decorated, all neutral tones and designer furniture with just enough abstract art to scream curated. Not lived in. That made it perfect. Once a week, Isabel and Noah met there. Same day, same hour, different excuses. At first it was thrilling, their own private little theater of indulgence. Isabel would slip out of her office at noon. Noah would fake a site visit or a lunch meeting. And by 12:30, they were behind closed doors, kissing like addicts chasing another high. "This is just our bubble," she whispered once, curled into the crook of his arm after. "Don't burst it." Noah laughed, a little awkwardly, like a snow globe. "Exactly," she murmured. "Perfect from the outside, fragile as hell if you shake it." But the snow globe had begun to shake. Noah's focus at work frayed. He missed 2 deadlines in 1 week. A senior designer had to reassign one of his drafts. And while no one said anything directly, the glances began. His phone buzzed more and more frequently, Isabel sending him pictures from her home gym in yoga gear, asking if a certain dress was too much for the gala. Or simply, "I miss you already. Call me, now." It stopped being just an affair. It became a schedule, a system, a demand. At the next team meeting, one of the more seasoned staff, Jonah, nudged him and muttered under his breath, "How do you keep getting assigned the premium clients? Charm, or connections?" Noah forced a grin. "Hard work, man, always pays off." But the words tasted like dust. Isabel had grown more possessive. Too, she asked to see his phone once, scrolling through his Instagram, pausing on a photo from 8 months ago with a girl named Mariana. "An old friend," Noah said quickly. "You still talk?" "Not really." "Good," she said, setting the phone down. "Let's keep it that way." Another time, she messaged him minutes after midnight because he hadn't replied to her earlier. "Are you with someone else tonight?" He wasn't. He never was anymore. He didn't have time for anyone else. Not with Isabel in his calendar, his inbox, and now, his head. He started writing in a leather-bound journal, a habit he'd picked up back in design school. Sketches, thoughts, fragments of emotions that didn't fit in text messages. But more than anything, he documented his meetings with Isabel. Each entry had a date. A short note: Thursday, she wore the blue heels again. Looked at me like I was the only person left in the world. Monday, first time she cried after. She said she didn't know why. Friday, I wanted to tell her I was scared. I didn't. It wasn't about sentiment. He just needed to feel something was real. That these hours, these stolen kisses and whispered lies, weren't just a fever dream he'd forget when the promotion wore off. One afternoon, as they lay tangled in the Airbnb's pale linen sheets, Isabel spotted the journal poking from his bag. She pulled it out, flipped through a few pages. "You document me?" she asked. An eyebrow raised. Noah froze. It helps me think, process things." She said nothing for a moment. Then she smiled, slow, feline. "Good," she whispered. "Now I know I live in your head too." She kissed him before he could reply. But something about her smile lingered after. Not affection, satisfaction. Later that week, As Noah walked past the main office after a client pitch, he noticed Victor Ramirez in a rare appearance, glass of whiskey in hand. Speaking to the finance director. They were laughing, calm, controlled. Noah stood frozen for a second, watching Victor's wife across the building through the reflection in the glass. Isabel, in her usual form-fitting cream blazer, talking to the HR lead, as poised as ever. He knew she hadn't asked him to be careful with texts. She hadn't told him to delete photos, hadn't insisted on burner phones, or new names. All the secrecy, it had been his concern, not hers. That night, as he lay in the dark Airbnb bed alone, Isabel had cancelled last minute. Citing a migraine, Noah read back the journal pages. And suddenly, he wondered, what if she wanted Victor to find out? Just not yet, not until it would hurt the most. Victor entered the design studio without warning. It wasn't like him. Normally, his presence was prefaced by emails, assistants, or the shuffle of meetings rescheduled in quiet panic. But this morning, he stepped through the frosted glass doors in tailored silence, holding a coffee in one hand and something else, something smaller, in the other. Noah looked up from his desk, heart skipping. Their eyes met. Victor gave a thin smile, almost polite. "Can I see your notebook?" he asked. The room froze. The intern at the far end stopped typing. Even the printer paused. Noah stood slowly, legs heavy. "Notebook?" Victor lifted the small black leather-bound journal Noah hadn't seen since 2 nights ago, the one Isabel had leafed through, then claimed she'd left behind. It was worn now. Opened. Read. Noah's stomach twisted into itself. But Victor's face showed nothing. No rage, no disgust, only control, absolute and still. He didn't wait for Noah's answer. He turned and walked into his private office. The message was clear. Follow. Less than an hour later, the article dropped. A clean layout, published on a respected interior design blog known for interviews and trend features. But today's headline read like acid. Affair scandal shakes studio's reputation. Designer, intern and executive's wife caught on camera. Beneath it, a still image from a networking gala, grainy, but damning. Isabel's hand on Noah's chest. Their heads too close for any professional excuse. Captioned with anonymous sources and quotes too accurate to be accidental. Isabel was summoned to the HR floor. Her heels echoed across the tile like a ticking clock. She was radiant as always, silk blouse, gold jewelry, eyes rimmed in perfect black. But when asked about the accusations, her tone turned softer, cracked. "He pursued me," she said. "He made me feel unsafe. I should have spoken up earlier." No tears, just enough tremble in her voice to signal pain, enough restraint to suggest dignity. Noah was called in next. But it wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. A single envelope, a termination letter, no explanation needed. The HR lead didn't look at him. "Your badge and credentials have already been revoked." Noah didn't fight. He didn't ask for a chance to explain. Somehow, he knew it wouldn't matter. By noon, his company email was deactivated. By 1, his LinkedIn profile was flagged with "former designer." By 4, whispers had become murmurs. Murmurs had become Slack messages. His name, once spoken with potential, was now covered in invisible ink. 3 days later, the audit began. It wasn't about infidelity, that wasn't illegal, but Isabel's expense reports were. Hundreds of dollars marked as client hospitality. Uber Black rides logged during hours no meetings occurred. A $3 dinner tagged as market research. No receipts, just names that didn't exist, or existed only in aliases. The board of directors called for a temporary suspension of her voting rights. Her PR access was revoked. Her name removed from the speaker list for the Milan showcase. And through it all, Victor never raised his voice. He never addressed the team. He never pulled Isabel aside in public. Only once did anyone hear him speak directly to her after the storm broke. It was in the parking lot, overheard by a maintenance technician who'd been replacing a light panel nearby. Victor stepped beside her as she reached her car. placed his hand gently on the doorframe. Then said, "Next time you want to play games, don't leave the rules in someone else's handwriting." He turned, walked away. She didn't follow. Noah didn't pack much. Just 2 suitcases, 1 laptop, and the journal he once thought about burning but couldn't. The leather binding felt heavier now, as if it carried not memories but indictments. He left Miami under an overcast sky, neither storm nor sunshine. Just that heavy indecision of a city that forgets you fast. The airport was quiet that morning. A red-eye to Atlanta. His friend Marcus had a guest room, a fold-out bed with creaky hinges. A window that faced a brick wall. It was enough. Atlanta was slower, cooler, and lonelier. No one knew his name in the co-working space he rented by the week. He redesigned mock websites for imaginary brands, applying for freelance gigs under different aliases, Nate, Elias, sometimes even Ramon, depending on the client. His portfolio was solid, impressive, even, but interviews never made it past the second call. They'd search him, always, even if the article didn't use his full name. The image, blurry as it was, carried just enough clarity. The comments under the blog post did the rest. One had read, "Looks like someone designed his own downfall." He stopped checking after that. The journal stayed in the drawer beside his bed. He didn't open it for weeks. Until one Tuesday, sometime past midnight, the weight of silence pressed too hard. He pulled it out, flipped through the pages like fingers grazing old bruises. She wore the blue heels again. I wanted to tell her I was scared. She kissed me before I could reply. There was a note tucked between the pages. One he didn't remember writing. "You think this is love. But this is just proximity and power in drag." He closed the book, placed it back in the drawer, locked it. An email came 2 days later. From Isabel Ramirez. Subject, "Just one thing." Body, "I don't regret you. But I regret your timing." No signature, no emojis, no follow-up. Noah stared at it for 20 minutes. He didn't reply. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just deleted it. That night, he dreamed of a design pitch, a room filled with light, glass panels, and applause. He was wearing the tie she'd given him, the navy silk one with the subtle diagonal texture. The knot was perfect. He woke up in sweat, ripped the tie from the closet, stuffed it deep in the kitchen trash, poured leftover coffee grounds on top. But in the mirror, he still saw it around his neck. Some days he thought about returning to Miami, walking past the studio, seeing her face, asking her why, but the answer was already in her silence. Noah wasn't ruined, not entirely. He still had his craft, his mind, but something inside him had changed dimensions, like a building restructured after a quiet earthquake. He no longer chased approval, or glances, or promises. He knew now that the game had never been his, that the rules had always been stacked, that charm could be currency, and betrayal, just another strategy. In the end, he understood one thing more clearly than ever. He thought it was a game. He didn't know, the rules were never written to protect him. Daniel had only been in New York for 3 months. But already, the city had started to mold him. Not in the obvious ways. His accent remained intact. His Buenos Aires rhythm still laced his speech, but in the subtler rewiring of how he walked into rooms. There was more calculation in his pauses, more restraint in his smiles. His eyes, naturally warm, had learned the art of neutrality. MBA programs taught you frameworks. Manhattan taught you masks. The startup he joined was less like a company and more like a curated ecosystem of obsession. Hayward Capital was lean, agile, and loud about its disruption. Finance, but make it sexy, and at the heart of its pitch deck brilliance and hyper-polished brand language were 2 names, Charles Hayward, the stoic tech whisperer with a background in quantitative modeling, and Natalie Hayward, the public face, former broadcast producer turned PR magician. Charles rarely spoke unless it mattered. He was the kind of man who wore silence like others wore wristwatches, expensive, intentional, and a signal to those who understood. His sharp British suits and minimalist office made him feel more like a gallery piece than a CEO. But everyone knew, if he called your name, you paid attention. Natalie, on the other hand, moved like sunlight through glass. She entered spaces in tones of cream and navy, high heels that never hurried, hair always a soft frame for a face that had long ago mastered elegance. When she laughed, people felt included. When she frowned, whole rooms shifted. The first time Daniel saw her, it wasn't in a meeting or office. It was at a quarterly pitch presentation, where she stood next to the screen like a conductor. Her voice was low, textured. She described market segmentation like it was foreplay. Daniel watched her, fascinated, not attracted, not then, just fascinated by how much power a single person could exert without raising her voice. 2 weeks later, he was assigned to assist her on a multi-phase brand outreach strategy. It was positioned as a mentorship, but the truth was simpler. She needed someone with both fluency in design language and the ability to write compelling copy. Daniel was fluent in both. Their first meeting was in her glass-walled corner office, with the skylines stitched across the windows like embroidery. "Daniel," she said, not looking up from her iPad. "Argentina, right? Buenos Aires?" He nodded. "Yes. You write like an American. But you speak like someone who reads poetry." He laughed. It wasn't flirtatious, but it wasn't sterile either. She looked at him then. Fully. "You might be wasted as an assistant." It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. Daniel felt it lodge somewhere in his chest. Their work rhythm settled into late nights and early texts. At first, always about deliverables, data points, client preferences. Then, after hours, she'd send him screenshots of brand failures. "Don't ever let me catch you using this shade of blue." Or snippets of quotes from obscure designers. "This is why aesthetic is politics." It wasn't until the investor dinner that something changed. She arrived late, wearing a black silk gown that made everyone else at the table look underdressed. Charles wasn't there. Delayed flight. Someone muttered. Daniel had been seated 2 chairs down, but she asked him to switch with someone, so he was suddenly next to her. "What do you think of them?" she whispered during the appetizers. He tilted his head. "The investors." He gave a half smile. "They seem more interested in your dress than your pitch." She laughed. "A short, real one. Don't flatter me, Daniel. It makes you sound young." After dessert, she leaned closer and murmured, "You have presence. Not confidence yet, but presence. That's rarer." That night, past midnight, he got a Slack notification. "Natalie, direct message, dinner was dull without you at the end. If you were there, I might have stayed longer." He stared at it for minutes, crafted his response, deleted it, then replied, "Next time, sit me closer from the start." She read it instantly. No reply. The next day, she was back to her usual tone in meetings, crisp, focused, slightly impatient. But something shifted in Daniel. It wasn't desire, not exactly. It was awareness, of how close she stood behind him while reading edits, of how often her fingers brushed the table beside his laptop, of how her compliments had undertones he hadn't recognized before. At the end of that week, during a brand audit presentation, Natalie publicly praised Daniel's contributions. "His instinct for tone is unnerving. I almost don't need to edit him." When the meeting ended, and everyone was leaving, she stayed back a moment, eyes on her laptop. "Not him," she said. "You have leadership potential, Daniel, more than some of the people above you." He didn't know what to say, so he said thank you. She looked up, her eyes held his for 3 seconds too long. And that night, while walking back to his apartment, Daniel thought, "I thought I was just getting promoted, not propositioned." The invitation arrived as a casual aside at the end of a long day. Natalie mentioned it while adjusting her coat in the hallway, a private networking mixer hosted at the penthouse suite of an investor known for his eccentric tastes and bottomless wine cellar. "You should come," she said, not looking at him. "Charles is in Boston. I hate these things alone." Daniel hesitated, unsure if the invitation was professional, social, or something that didn't have a category yet. There was a pause between him, Not long. But charged. She didn't smile when she said it. But her voice carried a thread of something unspoken. Something meant only for him to interpret. But he went. Of course he went. The penthouse in Tribeca was all chrome and crystal. Dim lights and murmured deals. Daniel wore the same suit he'd worn to 3 interviews. It didn't matter. The moment Natalie saw him walk through the door, she smiled like she'd won something. There was approval in her eyes. Not of what he wore, but of the fact that he came. That he chose her invitation over whatever other obligations might have waited. They floated between conversations, her hand occasionally on his arm, not possessive, not flirtatious, just anchoring, like a signal. This one's with me. It was subtle but not unintentional. Daniel could feel the room noting it. Men glanced, women evaluated, nobody said anything, but the current shifted wherever they stood. Charles didn't show. Something about a board meeting running late. Or maybe that was just the narrative crafted to justify the symmetry of the evening. Later, the crowd thinned, the lights dimmed, someone played Coltrane, and on the balcony, with the Hudson glittering like broken glass beneath them, Natalie offered him a glass of Sancerre and said, "You have everything it takes. But power doesn't wait for permission." The way she said it, it wasn't advice. It was a dare. Daniel didn't answer. He looked at her, the slope of her collarbone, the way the wind toyed with her hair, and felt something pull taut between them. It wasn't desire alone. It was a recognition of something shared, hunger, carefully masked by civility. Inside the suite, the air was warmer, the silence thicker, music drifted through rooms now mostly empty. She didn't ask. He didn't resist. Their kiss was soft at first, exploratory, then urgent, like something damned too long. They moved as if choreographed, not frantic but inevitable. The world outside narrowed to skin, breath, fabric falling. There was a tenderness to how she touched him. But it wasn't romantic. It was something between possession and performance. Daniel felt himself slipping, not into love, but into a role, one she had cast for him. They didn't speak much. There was no need. Whatever they were doing wasn't about words. Daniel woke before dawn, tangled in sheets that weren't his. Light from the window etching Natalie's silhouette into memory. But she was gone. On the marble counter sat a folder. Cream linen, embossed with the Hayward capital seal. Inside were pitch drafts, financial projections, and something else, an outline of Charles's upcoming proprietary investment model. No note, just the folder. Daniel stared at it for a long time. The edges of the pages felt too crisp, too deliberate. Was this carelessness, or was it bait? He closed it slowly, like a door he wasn't sure he wanted to walk through, but already had. And it struck him, with a cold clarity, that maybe this wasn't a gift. Maybe it was a test. He dressed, tied the same tie, looked at himself in the mirror and didn't fully recognize the man adjusting his collar. As he walked out, he told himself it was just strategy, just timing, nothing more, but something inside whispered, it wasn't just about being chosen. It was about what you chose to do once you were. And Daniel had made his move. The apartment was tucked away on the border of Soho and Nolita. A narrow stairwell above a cafe that smelled perpetually of burnt espresso and regret. It wasn't luxurious, at least not in the obvious way, but it was private. Anonymous. They called it the boardroom, half-jokingly, and only in whispers. Daniel always arrived first. He liked the stillness before she appeared, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the faint hum of the city pressing against the windows. He would open his laptop, pretend to review pitch decks. But really, he was rehearsing, his face, his words, his role. Natalie always arrived wearing sunglasses. Even at night, she'd toss her coat over the same chair, unbuckle her heels like she owned the floor beneath them, and kiss him, not warmly, not cruelly, just efficiently, like resetting a watch. After that, it was wine, talk, and whatever followed. They saw each other twice a week, sometimes 3, no schedule, no texts during the day. Everything existed in a pocket dimension where they weren't themselves, where she wasn't Natalie Hayward, wife of Charles, And he wasn't the intern turned analyst with perfect teeth and a sharpened resume. One night, Natalie lay with her head on his chest, eyes tracing the lines of light across the ceiling. He used to notice everything, she murmured, the way I changed perfume, the cut of a new dress. Now, he notices market shifts, profit margins. Daniel didn't respond. He knew silence invited more truth than questions ever could. He doesn't cheat, she continued, not with people, anyway. He cheats with ambition. It's like I'm married to a ghost who still pays the bills. Daniel didn't touch her hair, though he wanted to. Instead, he asked quietly, "Do you ever think about leaving?" She turned to face him, eyes narrowing with something unreadable. "And go where? Power is a prison, too, just with nicer wallpaper." That night, after she fell asleep, Daniel slid out of bed and opened his laptop. He started outlining a strategy deck, something lean, disruptive, built on gaps he'd identified from conversations with Natalie. The Hayward investment model had blind spots. He knew them now, because she had shown him, piece by intimate piece. He began taking notes, not on his laptop, but in a small, black notebook. He labeled entries by date, client, detail. Natalie never questioned it at first. She thought it was charming. Until one night, she found the notebook. She was looking for her phone. The notebook was half hidden under the mattress. Pages curled from use. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. Daniel's breath hitched. "Just ideas. Notes. I like to remember things, you know. Reflections." She flipped through a few pages. Her name appeared. So did Charles's. So did numbers. "You document me?" she asked, voice low. He nodded, slowly, only the good parts. There was a silence so thick it felt sentient. Then, she laughed. It wasn't joy or humor. It was something closer to recognition. "You really are something, Daniel." And she kissed him, long and deep, as if the acknowledgement only deepened her hold. After she left that night, Daniel messaged a contact at a boutique VC firm in Brooklyn. Attached was a proposal, just a teaser, no names, no direct figures, but enough to spark interest. Their reply was immediate: "Let's talk. Over lunch. And if possible, keep that connection open. The wife, she may be your best pipeline." Daniel sat alone in the boardroom apartment, the wine untouched, his phone still glowing. For the first time, he didn't feel flattered. He felt useful. He told himself this was just business, just leveraging what he'd learned. But he also knew what Natalie didn't, that love was a currency. And trust, when spent carelessly, was debt. The game was no longer a seduction. It was a transaction. And he was winning, at least, for now. The email landed in Charles Hayward's inbox at 4:03 a.m. No subject line, just a single line of text and an attachment. "You should know what your house is built on." From someone who used to believe. He opened the file. What stared back at him was a near-perfect replica of Hayward Capital's upcoming proprietary investment model, one that had been developed over the last 8 months in high-level meetings. Sealed rooms, and password-protected drives. Charles didn't slam his laptop. He didn't call for a meeting. He just sat there in the dim blue glow, rereading the line, not out of disbelief, but calculation. At 8 a.m. sharp, he walked into the IT floor and instructed the CTO to pull all server logs for the past 90 days. He wanted every remote access, every midnight login, every data export tracked and color-coded. The list came in that evening. One line glowed like a vein in a corpse. 3:12 a.m. Internal file accessed. IP origin: Natalie Hayward's home office account. Charles didn't confront her that night. He waited. 2 days later, he came home early, found her in the kitchen, slicing pomegranate, the blade sticky with red. "We need to talk," he said, calm, cold. She turned. "About what?" "The file, the model, the access." Natalie didn't ask how he knew. She sat down, slowly, pomegranate juice smudged her thumb. Her voice was barely audible. "I gave it to him. He didn't steal it. I gave it." Charles looked at her the way one might look at a fire long after it has consumed everything, more ash than anger. Why? Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't cry. Because he listened. Because you didn't. Because I wanted to matter to someone. Charles nodded once, then walked away. 2 hours later, Daniel received an official email from Hayward Capital's legal department. Subject: Notice of civil litigation and violation of intellectual property rights. 3 days later, he was served court papers. Asset freeze, NDA breach, intent to sue. By Friday, his name had been quietly blacklisted from every major hiring pool in New York finance. Natalie, she vanished from work. The office whispered, first about the affair, then about the data breach, then about the woman who had too much wine at the Lydian hotel bar. Climbed 21 stories, and stared over the edge. She didn't jump. Someone called security, but the rumor ran faster than the truth. Charles never issued a statement. He simply appointed a new brand director and diverted Natalie's responsibilities to a task force. Daniel sat in his apartment, stripped of credentials, of contacts, of leverage. The folder, the one Natalie had once left on the counter, still sat in his drawer. Untouched. He opened it one last time. Not to use it, to remind himself what betrayal looks like on paper. He told himself he never asked for it, that it was left there, given, but the law didn't care about intent. And neither, now, did anyone else. Buenos Aires wasn't where Daniel pictured his story ending. But stories don't ask where you want him to close. They just do. He had returned 6 weeks after the litigation had quietly strangled his future in New York. No trial, no press, just silence. His name removed from shortlists. Calls that stopped being returned. And one last handshake from a lawyer who said, "You'll want to keep things quiet. That's the best deal you're getting." So he disappeared. The apartment in Palermo was modest. Sunlight streamed in through the slatted windows like forgiveness he hadn't earned. He worked as a financial consultant under a pseudonym, mostly remote projects for companies too small to care about pedigree. His only real interaction was with the grocer downstairs, who always gave him one extra egg for free, never asking why his Spanish had the cadence of someone who'd lived too long in English. Daniel never reached out to anyone from New York. No friends, no colleagues, certainly not Natalie. His phone remained factory reset, tucked away in a drawer he never opened. He told himself that meant he was moving on. Until one evening, while reviewing spreadsheets for a logistics startup in Patagonia, a new message appeared in his inbox. The sender was untraceable. No name, no profile photo, just a subject line. "I never hated you, just hated that I mattered so little." There was no body text, no attachments, just that one sentence. Daniel closed the laptop, stared at the darkened screen until his own reflection blurred. That night, he opened the drawer. The old black notebook was still there. Its pages curled and yellowed slightly at the edges. The ink smudged from months of fingerprints and meaning. He flipped through it, not reading, just touching each page like a rosary. Every entry a memory, a decision, a transaction dressed up as intimacy. He almost tore it. Instead, he lit a match. In the kitchen sink, the flames moved quickly. Names dissolved. Numbers evaporated. Her handwriting disappeared beneath the orange tongues of heat. When it was done, he turned on the faucet, watched the ashes swirl down the drain like gray confessions. He didn't cry. He didn't speak, just stood there until the metal cooled under his fingertips. Later, brushing his teeth, he looked into the mirror. His face had hardened in places he hadn't noticed. There was a stillness in his eyes that didn't used to be there. Not resignation, not peace, just absence. He whispered to his reflection. Was it ever real? Or just another pitch? The mirror didn't answer. No one ever did. And somewhere in the city, a woman with graying eyes and flawless posture might still wonder if silence meant safety, or just distance. But Daniel understood now. He hadn't been chosen. He had been useful. And when use ran out, so did everything else. He thought he was playing the game. He didn't know. He was just the proof that even smart men lose when they fake love. Blake hadn't expected the email. Not at 9:43 p.m. Not from her. The firm had just wrapped up a tense mock trial round for one of their biggest pharmaceutical clients. And he was still nursing the adrenaline in his bones when the message landed. You defended a lost cause better than most defend real ones. Wine to celebrate. No signature. No need. He read it 3 times. Unsure if the meaning lay in the compliment or the invitation. Or both. 3 months earlier, Blake had walked through the revolving glass doors of Foster and Hayward with the energy of someone ready to fight giants. At 26, he was the youngest litigation associate in a firm built on prestige and pedigree. A Stanford law graduate, Argentine-born and Pacific Northwest bred. He carried himself with a calm that belied his hunger. Sharp suits, clean manners, no family in town. He was a man without distractions. But even excellence had limits here. The firm was a pyramid. And he was still looking for the hand that would pull him up. That hand, it seemed, belonged to Amelia Grant. He met her at the firm's fall gala, hosted in the glass atrium of the Columbia Tower. Amelia was not loud. She didn't need to be. She arrived in a deep black velvet gown. Her posture elegant, her presence magnetic. Partner, senior, 10 trials won and none lost. She was the kind of success that didn't announce itself but waited for you to catch up. Blake had seen her before. In passing, her husband, Henry Grant, was one of the founding members of the firm, now semi-retired and often absent. Amelia was his legacy made flesh. And no one doubted she carried more weight in internal votes than her title suggested. They were introduced briefly at the bar. He expected a nod, maybe a polite smile. Instead, she held his gaze, just a second too long. "You're Blake Santiago, aren't you? The one who quoted Cicero in the litigation draft?" "Yes, I thought no one noticed." "Oh, we notice everything." Her smile was light, but her eyes weren't. They stayed on him as if searching for the right use. In the weeks that followed, Blake found himself in her orbit more than coincidence could explain. He was asked to assist with a case she was overseeing, then with a cross-examination prep she led, then a presentation at a clients-only roundtable where she praised his disciplined eloquence in front of 2 managing partners. She didn't touch him, didn't flirt, but her presence bent the air. And then, the email. The idea of declining felt foolish. Blake wasn't naive, but he wasn't arrogant either. If this was a test, he needed to pass it. If it was something else, he wasn't sure. He replied with a single word, "When?" They met the next evening at a wine bar nestled behind a bookstore in Capitol Hill. The place was dim, walls lined with bottles instead of books. She arrived in a navy coat and boots that clicked like punctuation. She ordered for them both without asking. Cabernet, 99. It won a trial I lost the year before. I trust it more than people. Blake chuckled, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she watched him sip, evaluating. They didn't speak about law. Not directly. She asked about his childhood in Buenos Aires. His transition to Washington State. He spoke of cold mornings, immigrant parents, scholarship fights. "You know how to sound like the underdog," she said, while still winning. "That's rare." He wanted to respond, but something in her voice cut deeper than praise. Like she was drawing lines on a map only she could read. As they parted outside, she put her hand lightly on his arm. "You belong here, Blake, but don't expect the rules to be fair. Just learn who writes them." That night, Blake lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't in love, not even infatuated, but he couldn't sleep. He thought about the way she looked at him when she said, "belong." Like a door cracked just enough for an offer to slip through. He thought he was being noticed. But maybe he was being selected. 3 days later, during a firm-wide meeting, she entered late and sat beside him. Their elbows nearly touched. She didn't look at him, but when she passed him her notes for a clause revision, there was a small line in the corner of the page. "Not all promotions come from performance. Some come from proximity." His breath hitched. Was this real? The next day, she CC'd him on a case file he wasn't assigned to. She wrote, "Thought you'd enjoy the argument structure." He knew, then, this wasn't random, and it wasn't a game. It was a selection process. and he was already inside it. His friends back in law school used to joke, "You either climb by work or by whispers." Blake had always thought he'd climb by work. But now, whispers were louder. He opened his laptop, clicked back to that first email, read it again, whined to celebrate, then stared at his reflection in the black screen. "I thought I was just getting promoted," he whispered to himself, not propositioned. The text from Amelia came just past midnight. "I like your tie today." That was all, no salutation, no emoji, but Blake stared at it for longer than he should have, thumb hovering over the keyboard, uncertain if he should reply at all. In the end, he didn't, but he dreamt of her that night anyway, her eyes scanning a courtroom. Her laugh tucked inside the curve of a wineglass. It became a rhythm. Every other evening, a message, sometimes short, "You always seem to know when to say the right thing," sometimes vague. But never fully platonic. They didn't reference the office. They didn't make direct propositions. But the space between what was said and what wasn't grew thinner, like a glass wall fogging under pressure. On a Wednesday evening, the litigation team stayed late to review a sensitive case file. Amelia joined, uncharacteristically, when the others left around 10:30. She lingered. Blake was about to shut his laptop when she glanced over and said, "Stay, just a few minutes. I want to go over the Grant case one more time." He nodded, unsure whether he wanted to or felt compelled to. In the glass conference room on the 19th floor, Seattle stretched like a circuit board, light grids, faint clouds, a trace of the sound. Amelia removed her heels, sat cross-legged on the leather chair, and flipped through a printed brief. "You always bring clarity to chaos," she murmured, half to herself. "That's generous," he replied. She looked up, her gaze held longer than expected. "You don't understand what it's like, do you, to be noticed only when convenient? To be exceptional, but never exceptional enough to matter more than a man's schedule?" Blake opened his mouth to speak, but didn't. Amelia stood, walked to the window. He followed, as if drawn by her orbit. When she turned to him, the movement was slow, like a decision already made hours ago. She reached up, adjusted his collar slightly, and let her fingers rest just a moment too long. Then came the light touch on his wrist. The silence, the gravity. They kissed, not urgently, not messily, like two people inhaling the same lie and pretending it was truth. He didn't sleep at her place. She didn't invite him, but when he reached home, the echo of her perfume clung to his shirt like an answer he didn't want. The next morning, a file was on his desk, annotated, color-coded, with a sticky note in Amelia's handwriting, "You've earned a seat at more than just the table." Blake read it 5 times, then stored it in the bottom drawer. He told himself this wasn't about ambition, that it wasn't about moving faster than the hierarchy allowed. It was personal, real, but deep down, in a voice he wouldn't admit even to himself, he knew Amelia hadn't just chosen him for comfort. She had chosen him because she could. And he let her, because he wanted to matter. The boundary had been crossed. Softly, elegantly, but irrevocably. The apartment near Lake Union was staged like a design showroom, everything in muted tones and deliberate lighting. Like desire curated into aesthetic. Amelia referred to it as their neutral ground, a phrase that both soothed and unsettled Blake. It suggested safety, yet also implied war without uniforms, without declarations, just strategies, positions, and silence. They met every Thursday at 7 p.m. Always punctual, always discreet. She brought gifts, a Mont Blanc pen one week, a vintage bottle of Barolo the next. On his birthday, she handed him a Cartier watch without ceremony, simply saying, "You wear time well. You don't have to keep doing this," Blake had said once, turning the box over in his hands. Amelia only smiled. "I know, but I like to reward good judgment." The sex was always slow, precise, like negotiations. There was no fumbling, no chaos. Even in intimacy, Amelia led like she was closing a deal. She didn't surrender, she curated. Each touch, each breath was layered in implication. But what lingered after wasn't the physical. It was her voice, whispering promises of introductions to board members, name drops of senior partners who were suddenly curious about Blake. In those moments after, as they lay in silence beside each other, Blake would watch the city shimmer outside the window and wonder what version of himself he had stepped into. The confident associate, the kept man, the future partner, or just another name on Amelia's long list of clever, ambitious toys. At work, his world tilted. Colleagues noticed. Files that should have taken a week were returned in 3 days. Missing citations, dotted with errors. His supervisor sent him a terse note. "You're smarter than this." Focus. One of the associates, a cynical third-year named Jenna, passed him in the break room and murmured, "Must be nice to have someone upstairs rooting for you." Blake wanted to deny it. Wanted to explain the late nights, the pressure, the imposter syndrome, but he said nothing, because she wasn't wrong, and he wasn't ready to confront the fact that his effort now walked in tandem with Amelia's influence. Amelia became possessive. Slowly, she'd ask about his social media activity, why he liked a female paralegal's vacation photo, why he smiled so long at the barista downstairs. Her tone was always playful, almost maternal, but the subtext scraped like a nail behind velvet. "I'm not jealous," she said once, brushing dust off his shoulder in the hallway. "I just think you've forgotten whose name is on your next recommendation." And that was the thing. She never yelled, never accused, but her reminders were velvet ropes, tightening gently, and Blake, half hypnotized by the future she dangled, didn't resist. He rationalized it. "She's helping me. She sees me. She wants me to win." But when she started suggesting he skip company events unless she attended, when she criticized him for laughing too easily with interns, the rope cinched tighter. He began to cancel casual lunches, stopped replying to texts that weren't strictly professional. He even unfollowed a few colleagues online, just in case. Then came the folder. One Thursday, she arrived holding a sleek leather dossier. Inside, a detailed proposal for an international joint venture her husband had spent months negotiating, one not yet public. Not even finalized. She placed it in Blake's lap. "If you ever want your own firm," she said, uncorking the Barolo, "this is your blueprint." Blake stared at the documents. Charts, contact names, preliminary figures. It was everything. Too much. "Why are you showing me this?" Amelia sipped her wine. "Because I believe in talent. Because I'm tired of watching men hand opportunities to mediocre protégés. Because if you're going to matter, you need a head start." He didn't sleep that night. He walked around Lake Union instead, hands deep in his coat pockets, the cold slicing through the fog of wine and guilt. The city looked clean and distant, like a dream built by people who didn't bleed. His footsteps echoed in his mind, the rhythm of a man running in place. Was this generosity, manipulation, or just another form of seduction? He remembered her hand on his chest, just before she left, saying, "Use it, or don't. But don't pretend you weren't ready." By the end of the week, he had scanned the proposal, memorized parts of it. The thought of using it flickered like a pilot light inside him, steady, quiet, waiting for fuel. He still hadn't decided what he would do, but a voice inside him had already started drafting emails. And another voice, a quieter, more human one, had started asking, "Who is she really? And who am I becoming?" The web was spun, and Blake was no longer sure who had caught whom, or if they both wanted to be caught all along. The video clip was exactly 13 seconds long. Grainy, but unmistakable. Amelia and Blake. Elevator. Late night. Her hand brushing against his tie. His fingers grazing her hip. Just enough to silence deniability. It hit the firm like a slow-moving avalanche. No screams. No accusations. Just a quiet recalibration of faces in corridors and whispered questions behind closed doors. The clip arrived via encrypted email. No sender, no note, just the subject line, "For your ethics committee." Blake was in a deposition meeting when HR knocked. He stepped out and never returned. A suspension notice waited in his inbox. Within an hour, his access to the firm's server was revoked. By end of day, the managing partner's office had called an emergency ethics review. He hadn't even seen Amelia that day. Or the next. Grant, her husband, the towering name on the firm's letterhead, said nothing. No confrontation, no drama, just a legal complaint filed with the internal board, citing breach of professional conduct, conflict of interest, and actions compromising the integrity of litigation strategy. Blake read it in silence. 3 pages. Clinical, surgical, no emotion, just precision. The kind that made it hard to breathe. When he saw Amelia again, it was in the glass corridor between the east and west wings. She looked at him like a stranger, not cold, not angry, just distant, measured. "You knew this was a risk," she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, almost maternal. Blake's throat tightened. "Did you send it?" A pause, a blink, a shrug. "It was going to fall apart eventually. I just didn't think it'd be so fast." Then came the pivot. In her formal written statement to the ethics board, Amelia claimed, "The relationship began outside the bounds of professional consent. I felt pressured. I attempted to end it multiple times." Blake read that sentence 6 times. It didn't sound like her. But it sounded exactly like what the board wanted to hear. He was asked to submit his firm devices, his case notes, his last 3 months of correspondence. His mentor within the litigation team withdrew his recommendation letter. An upcoming speaking event, cancelled. His inbox, once filled with praise and banter, was now a graveyard of read receipts and silence. No one yelled, no one called him a liar. But everything vanished. Amelia, too, was not spared. The review board issued a suspension. Then, 2 weeks later, a vote. She was removed from the partnership circle. Her name, once etched into the etched glass by the front lobby, was quietly peeled off. No press release, no explanation, just the clean efficiency of institutional shame. Blake moved through it like a sleepwalker. He didn't pack his desk, didn't answer messages from friends, just watched the city from his apartment window, watching the world that had once seen him as brilliant, as promising, now blot him out like spilled ink on parchment. His world hadn't exploded, it had evaporated. There was no anger in him. Not yet, only a stunned, suspended sense of loss, not for Amelia, not even for the job, but for the version of himself who thought he was in control. The legal world, he now understood, didn't scream when it punished. It documented, it archived, it wrote your downfall into footnotes. And footnotes, Blake realized, are never read aloud. Tacoma was quieter than Seattle in every way that mattered. The rain still fell with a familiar rhythm, but the skyline was humbler, the air less charged. Blake rented a 1-bedroom above a tax consultancy office, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions as long as the checks cleared. He worked odd hours, taking on freelance litigation summaries and ghostwriting appellate memos for boutique firms too small to care about who he used to be. His name was no longer Blake Mercer. On his business card, when he bothered to carry one, it read, David L. Crane. No LinkedIn, no bar association dinners, no drinks with former colleagues. His phone remained on silent, not out of paranoia but habit. Silence was the only voice he trusted now. He didn't talk to anyone about Seattle, not even to himself. There was no ceremony to his exit, no goodbye lunches, no handwritten notes, just a resignation email with no subject line and a single sentence, "Thank you for the opportunity." The only contact he maintained was with his landlord. The rent went out the first of every month. Beyond that, nothing tied him to any previous identity. If he died tomorrow, the firm would barely pause. But he still had the folder, the old case file, the one from his very first win as a junior associate, a pro bono eviction defense where he had written every page, prepped every witness, cross-examined like his life depended on it. He had kept it for sentiment at first. Now, it felt like a taunt. One Tuesday night, a cold one, he found himself staring at it again. The folder lay on the dining table beside an untouched microwave meal. He opened it, read a few lines. His own annotations stared back, young, idealistic, Too many commas. He whispered to the room. Was I ever good, or just useful? The answer didn't come, only the hum of the old refrigerator answered, punctuated by the occasional screech of tires below. Then, the email arrived. No sender name, no message body, just a subject line. I wanted to feel wanted. But you wanted to feel important. He stared at it for a full minute. His cursor hovered over the trash icon. He clicked delete. He didn't read it again. Didn't wonder if it was Amelia. Because it didn't matter. What lingered was not the message, but what it unlocked. That night, Blake walked down to the waterfront. He brought the old folder with him. The wind whipped through his coat. The pages trembled in his hand. One by one, he tore them. The sound was not satisfying. Just final. He let the shreds fall into the water. Watched them vanish into the dark. There was no catharsis, just completion. Back at home, he looked in the mirror. Not out of vanity, he simply needed to know what version of himself had survived. His face looked older, not in age, but in weight, like a man who had carried someone else's dream too long and dropped it too late. He touched the glass, whispered, "She said I was different. But in the end, I was just dispensable." And then came the final thought, one that would echo through his nights for years. He thought he was playing the game. He didn't know. He was just the piece someone else moved first. The city didn't know his name anymore. But he remembered, and memory, he realized, is the most loyal punishment of all. The evening air outside the Boston headquarters of Sentinel Dynamics smelled faintly of winter salt and polished brass. Inside, the lights from the launch gala refracted off champagne flutes and rows of medals pinned to dark suits. Mason stood near the edge of the crowd, balancing a glass he hadn't touched, eyes scanning the room like he was still trying to believe he belonged here. 28, recently graduated with honors from MIT. Mason had landed what many would call a dream position, cyber defense lead analyst for a defense contractor whose clients wore stars on their shoulders. But dreams were relative, and his felt more like a waiting room than a runway. Everyone here had war stories and connections. Mason had code. That wasn't enough. Not here. He had just started calculating how long he could linger before ducking out unnoticed when he heard her voice. "You remind me of someone who had potential but didn't know it yet." He turned, and there she was, Elena Brenner, wife of the man who owned the room. Dark green silk dress, subtle gold jewelry, posture like she had never needed to apologize for a single decision in her life. Her eyes, a gray-green hue that didn't blink much, fixed on him with the kind of weight that made a man feel visible in a way he couldn't quite pass. He tried to stand a little taller. "Mom," she smiled, "you're Mason, correct, the one who flagged the API breach during the latest firewall audit?" He nodded, surprised. That had only gone up the chain a few days ago. "I make it a point to know who protects what I help communicate. You keep us quiet in all the right ways." Her compliment was clinical, but the pause between her words wasn't. There was a deliberateness in her presence, like someone who knew the exact temperature a conversation had to reach before boiling. "You have a sharp mind. But you hide it. Why?" Mason blinked. "I just prefer not to overplay." "Interesting strategy. Let's see if it works." And with that, she turned and walked back into the crowd, her scent trailing faintly behind, a mix of cedar and something floral he couldn't name. That night, at 10:58 p.m., Mason's company email pinged. Subject: Secure Comms. Message: "If you're not doing anything tonight, I'd like to pick your brain about secure comms." Sent from elena.brenner@sentineldan.com. His stomach tightened. He read it twice, 3 times. There was no attachment, no greeting, just the ask, sharp and clean. He didn't reply immediately. He told himself it was because of professionalism. But the truth lived closer to a strange pulse in his chest. Was this mentorship, a networking opportunity, or something else entirely? He tried to picture her husband's face, the colonel, stoic and unreadable, whose framed medals lined the boardroom wall. The man shook hands like he measured trust in pounds of pressure. And yet it was his wife who had found Mason. And now she wanted a conversation that couldn't wait until morning. Mason typed a reply. Available after 11. Should I call? Her answer came within a minute. No, just come upstairs. Penthouse elevator code is 0527. That number. The Colonel's service year. He stared at the screen. This was beyond informal. It was scripted intimacy wearing a professional disguise. The walk to the elevator felt longer than it was. At the top floor, the doors opened directly into a space that smelled of wood polish and restrained luxury. No photos, no clutter, just the quiet hum of a place that didn't expect visitors. Elena was there, barefoot, with 2 glasses of something red already poured. "You're late," she said, but her tone was amused. "I didn't confirm." "Exactly." They sat. She asked about secure mobile protocols. He answered. Then she asked about his family. He paused. Then she leaned in and said, "You need to stop waiting for permission to be exceptional." He didn't sleep with her that night. But he left the penthouse an hour later feeling like something had already shifted. Not physically, strategically, emotionally. He lay awake in his apartment. The city silent outside, replaying everything, her voice, her stillness, the unspoken lines between questions. She had led the conversation like someone who could draft an interrogation without ever calling it one. The next morning, his inbox was empty, no follow-up, no confirmation that it even happened. Just a lingering sense that the night had been realer than anything he'd known since starting the job. By noon, someone from the upper brass nodded at him in the hallway. At 2 p.m., he was invited to sit in on a high-clearance meeting about supply chain vulnerabilities. And by 3:30, he realized the shift wasn't just in his gut. Whatever had started last night, it had consequences. He looked out his office window and muttered to himself, "I thought I was being mentored, not recruited into her bed." Philadelphia in October was colder than Mason expected. The conference center buzzed with uniformed engineers, ex-Intel officers, and cybersecurity experts debating protocols over overpriced coffee. Mason had been there for 48 hours and already felt like a ghost in polished shoes. No one remembered your name unless you wore the right badge. No one asked where you were from unless your CV made him feel underqualified. Except her. Elena Brenner arrived the second morning in a tailored navy blazer, a silk scarf the shade of frost, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She barely said hello before sliding into the empty chair beside him during the keynote. Her perfume, a precise blend of power and restraint, settled between them. "Colonel's in D.C. all week again," she said quietly, like it was a weather report. "I hate the silence in this house." Mason nodded, unsure if it was a statement or an invitation. The rest of the day unfolded with academic monotony, slides, citations, applause. Elena vanished before the final panel. That night, Mason returned to his room alone, scrolled through briefing memos, and told himself he had imagined the implication. Then his phone lit up. "Elena Brenner. You don't have to knock. I left the door open. Room 1204. Mason stared at the screen. Every rational fiber in him screamed don't go. He wasn't stupid. He knew she was married. He knew this wasn't mentorship. But rationality lost to hunger, the kind that doesn't come from loneliness but from never having been seen. When he opened the door, she didn't speak. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling glass. She stood at the window, barefoot, sipping something dark from a crystal tumbler. Her hair was down for the first time. The silence wasn't awkward, it was loaded. She turned to him slowly. "I always admired curiosity," she said. "You strike me as someone who doesn't wait for permission." Mason took one step forward. She didn't move. Another step. Still no movement. Then she reached out, not abruptly, but with intention, and touched the side of his jaw. "You ask good questions," she whispered. Their first kiss wasn't explosive. It was cautious, measured, exploratory, the way you taste something expensive for the first time, unsure if you can afford the appetite. The rest followed like a script neither of them admitted they had memorized. Her hands pulled. His body answered. Clothes fell like negotiations. The bed took no sides. After, she lay beside him, one leg draped over his like a tether. Her voice was low, nearly drowned out by the hum of HVAC. There are doors in this company that only open to those who know where the keys are. I think you do. Mason didn't reply. He stared at the ceiling, heart still galloping. Part of him wanted to believe she meant something more, about trust, about ambition, but another part, the colder, more mathematical part, wondered, what key, what door, and who holds the map? The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. A note on the nightstand, handwritten in a looping hand. Keep your head down, but your mind wide open. That day, Mason walked into the main auditorium of the conference and noticed how heads turned, just a few. Just long enough to matter. The director of logistics nodded at him. The CTO shook his hand longer than usual. He was being noticed, but not for his ideas. For something else, something he couldn't yet name. That night, he replayed the entire evening again in his head. The messages, the touch, the whisper, the weight of her leg over his. And beneath it all, a quiet voice that said, "You're in." But into what? What Elena gave him wasn't just desire. It was the illusion of elevation. But as every engineer knows, elevation without structure collapses under its own weight. And Mason had just stepped off the foundation. He told himself he could handle it. He was smart, calculated. This was just the beginning of something strategic. But the thing about first touches is they don't just cross boundaries. They erase them. And once erased, there's no map to get back. Elena's visits to Mason's desk became more frequent after the Philadelphia conference. She always arrived under the guise of needing insight, or clarifying something from a meeting. But Mason noticed the rhythm. Every Tuesday, just after 4 p.m., when the colonel's calendar showed a standing off-site debriefing. One Tuesday, she slipped him a red folder marked confidential in bold. "Just for your perspective," she said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I trust your judgment." Inside were internal topology maps, network architecture for a compartmentalized encryption module. The kind of document that never left the server room, let alone passed through a junior engineer's hands. Mason studied it that night with a mix of awe and nausea. It was brilliant, and restricted. Just referencing it in an email would violate 3 sections of the non-disclosure agreement he signed on day 1. He didn't sleep. By Friday, another document arrived, a draft proposal between Brenner Tech and an allied international defense group, with metadata showing it had been copied from the colonel's private drive. When he confronted Elena about it, she smiled calmly. "Ideas don't belong to one man," she said, "especially when that man got them from someone like me." Mason didn't press, because part of him agreed, because part of him wanted to believe he was now part of something deeper, something revolutionary. But his friend Trevor, one of the few people Mason still trusted, noticed the change. "You're twitchy," Trevor said one evening after work. "You walk like you're rehearsing an alibi. What's going on?" Mason shrugged. "Nothing, just long hours." Trevor narrowed his eyes. "You ever hear of the Espionage Act? Because even whispering about what I think you're looking at would qualify." That night, Mason sat in his apartment, alone, the glow of the documents still lingering on his screen. He hadn't saved anything, hadn't printed, but he'd absorbed every word, every diagram, and he'd started to shape them, drafting a concept paper of his own. He told himself it wasn't stealing. He was building, innovating, like any startup founder would do, stand on the shoulders of giants. Even if those giants were his employer. The line between inspiration and theft blurred fast when ambition was involved. Elena fed him just enough to keep him dependent. An email thread here, a debriefing memo there, always saying, "Just don't share it with anyone. I trust you." And then came the blueprint. A fully detailed proposal for a private encryption subsystem, unlisted on company architecture plans, but labeled as a shadow node. Elena handed it to him in a sealed envelope. "If you ever want your own firm," she whispered, "this is your blueprint." Mason held the envelope in his hands for hours before opening it. When he finally did, his hands shook. Not from fear, but exhilaration. He knew he could build it. He knew it could work. But as he outlined version 1 of the pitch deck in a private Google Doc, the thought crept in like a crack in concrete. Was this love? Or leverage? The next day, he kissed her in the stairwell between the 4th and 5th floors. Her breath was warm, her grip possessive, but her eyes were clinical, watchful. He whispered, "What if someone sees us?" She replied without blinking, "Then they'll know who you belong to." It wasn't the answer of someone in love. It was the answer of someone who owned. The following week, Mason received a package at home. No return address. Inside was a burner phone and a typed note. "If something ever happens, you don't know me." We never talked. He stared at the note, at the phone, then back at the note. This was no longer mentorship. This wasn't an affair. This was a mission. And he had just realized he wasn't the agent. He was the asset. Used, mapped, tagged, and maybe already marked for disposal. But he wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Because somewhere between lust and loyalty, he had crossed a line he couldn't redraw. And the woman who held his heart held something else too, his freedom. It happened at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when even nightmares pause. 3 sharp knocks at the door. Then the low, assertive voice, "Federal agents. Open the door." Mason woke with a start, heart punching his ribs. Barefoot, shirtless, half blind with sleep, he stumbled toward the door. When he opened it, 2 men in windbreakers were already stepping in. One wore gloves. The other carried a folder marked with the seal he knew from TV, Department of Justice. "Mason Carter, you're under investigation for unauthorized access to classified defense infrastructure and unlawful transmission of protected data. We have a warrant to search the premises." He froze. Every possible explanation vanished. There was no misunderstanding, no mistake. This was real. Within minutes, they had his laptop, phone, even his router. One of the agents found the burner phone Elena gave him. He didn't even try to hide it. Down at the Boston field office, the walls were off-white and the air too still. He sat in a windowless room for hours before someone finally spoke to him. A man in a tie, whose voice was colder than the air. "An encrypted package was sent from your company's internal server at 2:44 a.m. yesterday morning. It matched access credentials tied to your terminal. The recipient domain, proxy servers in Eastern Europe." Mason blinked. "I didn't send anything." Then who did? Silence. Because the answer was either the woman who vanished, or the man in the mirror. Elena was gone. Her office cleared out. Her name badge deactivated. All internal communications wiped clean. When asked about him, she said one sentence: "He accessed it. I trusted him. He broke that trust." Colonel Brenner, once the distant storm on Mason's horizon, now turned full thundercloud. He handed over every piece of evidence: access logs, security camera timestamps, badge entry records, even cafeteria receipts. All of it painted Mason as the lone actor, the traitor, the weak link. No lawyer would touch him. Not in that city, not in that industry. He sat through interrogation after interrogation. Questions layered with the kind of quiet disdain only national betrayal could earn. One agent asked, "Did she promise you a company? Or just her bed?" He didn't answer, because by then, Mason had already seen the internal transcripts, the flagged emails, the metadata, the call logs. Elena never said anything incriminating. She always steered conversations back to ambiguity. She never instructed, never confirmed. She only suggested, she only trusted. He reread her texts, now part of official evidence, and saw them not as romantic fragments but as chess moves. "You're different. You see through the noise. People like us don't ask permission. We write the rules. If this works, I owe you dinner in Prague." Each sentence now read like a trap with silk lining. She was never vulnerable, never emotional. She was the firewall, and he was the breach. The charges mounted: unauthorized access, conspiracy, violation of the Espionage Act. Mason sat in holding, staring at the steel table, and thought of the first time she touched his face. He wanted to believe there had been a moment, just one, where it was real. Where he was more than a tool, more than the plausible scapegoat. But he couldn't find that moment. Because every step of their story was engineered. Every signal crafted, every silence weaponized. He was never the partner. He was the plan. And now he sat in a cage made not of iron, but of trust weaponized. He had wanted to feel chosen. Instead, he was framed. As he was led out of the interrogation room for transfer, one of the agents muttered, "Next time, kid, don't confuse a seduction for a security clearance." Mason said nothing, but in his mind, one line echoed louder than any siren. "I was never loved. I was just." Plausible deniability. Mason Carter lived now in a town that never asked questions. A place where the winters were long and the silences longer. He worked at a parts distribution warehouse just outside Montpelier, Vermont. No one there cared what school he'd gone to. No one Googled names or asked about clearances. They cared if the forklifts ran. If the barcode scanners scanned. That was it. He clocked in, clocked out, wore a name tag that said, Martin Cole, ate lunch alone, lived in a one-room apartment above a shuttered bakery. No internet, no smartphone, just a landline, and a radio he rarely turned on. It had been 18 months since the case was closed. The plea deal had come with conditions, no prison time, but a lifetime ban from working in defense, security, or anything with even the scent of encryption. The media never knew his name, but every hiring manager in the industry did. His file was quietly passed around as a cautionary tale. He wasn't convicted, but he was condemned. No word from Elena, none ever came, and he never tried to find her. Sometimes, late at night, he would replay their conversations in his head. The way her voice dipped when she said his name. The way she'd touch his collar and say, "You clean up too well for someone so dangerous." But even those memories began to fade. It was the laugh that lingered longest. Light, effortless, as if nothing in the world could touch her. He hadn't touched a line of code since. Not even for himself. His laptop sat in a drawer, wrapped in an old t-shirt, powered off like a dead organ. Then one evening, while sorting inventory returns in the back office, the manager waved him over. "You've got mail," she said, tossing a white envelope onto the table. No return address, no stamp, just his alias, written in block print. Inside, a USB stick. And a slip of paper. "You wanted access. I wanted escape." No signature, no date. He stared at the message until his vision blurred. He didn't plug the drive in. He didn't need to. He knew what it was. Proof, or poison, or maybe both. That night, Mason poured a glass of cheap scotch and sat at the edge of his bed. For the first time in a year, he opened his laptop, not to code, not to search, just to listen. One folder, one file, a voice recording, the hotel room in Philadelphia, Elena laughing, the rustle of sheets, a glass being set down, her voice saying, "I bet you think this matters." He listened once, then dragged the file to the trash, and emptied it. The next morning, he shaved for the first time in weeks, looked into the mirror. The face staring back at him wasn't young anymore. It wore no illusions, no entitlement, only consequence. She had once told him he was different. But he wasn't. He was just the one who didn't ask questions. And that made him perfect. She didn't need him to be smart, just willing. He had thought it was love. But it had only ever been leverage. She escaped. He rebuilt. But some echoes don't fade. They just settle, somewhere deep, just beneath the skin, where guilt becomes muscle, and memory, a weapon no firewall blocks. He thought it was about love. But it was only about leverage. The Denver skyline shimmered through the 23rd floor windows of Orient. The city's most revered fashion and lifestyle magazine, Ryan Hart, 29 and freshly hired, stood in a crisp button-down with coffee in one hand and insecurity in the other. It was his second week. But already the office's aesthetic perfection made him feel like he was constantly underdressed, not in clothing, but in experience. His desk was strategically placed near the editorial bullpen. yet just far enough from the glass-walled conference room where decisions and power lived, and it was there he first saw her, Isabel Green. She walked like someone who had edited her own silhouette. Every motion economical, every glance curated. She was tall without towering, understated in her elegance, hair tied in a loose chignon, lips always a neutral matte, her clothes the kind of tailored simplicity that whispered money. Her voice was velvet over gravel. She was married to David Green, the editor-in-chief, a man of sharp suits and sharper silences. Most people in the office spoke of him with reverence. Of her, they whispered. The first interaction came in the form of a sticky note. It was left on a printout of Ryan's draft campaign pitch. You write like someone who sees more than the brief allows. Don't waste it with safe metaphors. Ryan reread the note twice. Then again. It was praise, sure, but also a test. Did she mean he was talented? Or presumptuous? That night, he spent an hour rewriting the pitch, then another staring at the note as if it held a cipher. Over the following week, the notes became emails, always short, always sent late, 10:48 p.m., 11:22 p.m. Feedback wrapped in compliment. That turn of phrase in your second draft. Lethal in the best way. Ever thought of writing long form? You've got the pulse. People like you shouldn't hide in bullet points. Ryan felt seen, in a way no one had made him feel before. Not just as an employee, but as someone with potential. Isabel didn't flatter. She identified. And that felt addictive. One Friday, she invited him to sit in on a closed-door brainstorm session. There were only 5 chairs. She made sure he had one. After the meeting, while others filed out, she lingered. You're adapting quickly, she said, standing closer than necessary. I like people who don't need a map. Ryan chuckled nervously. Sometimes I feel like I'm just guessing well. So do the best of us. The trick is never admitting it. That night, an email arrived at 11:03 p.m. I'm working late. If you're not busy, I'd love your thoughts on a tagline for our fall issue. Something about reinvention, maybe. Attached, a half-written concept with her own draft notes. Casual, collaborative, yet there was something else. The subject line was just one word, metamorphosis. Ryan replied. 10 minutes later, she sent another. You've got instinct. That can't be taught. He found himself staying late just to match her hours, hoping she'd pass by. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't, but when she did, the air seemed to shift. When she leaned over his desk to look at his screen, her perfume, light jasmine, maybe, settled into his breath. He told himself he was imagining things. That Isabel was simply invested in the magazine. That her compliments were professional. That her touch on his shoulder during that brainstorming session was just encouragement. Until the Wednesday she texted. David's flying to New York for the weekend. I'll be in charge of approvals. If you're around Saturday, want to help me sort through pictures? It wasn't what she said. It was the time, 10:56 p.m. And the second message. I promise not to edit your metaphors too much. Ryan lay in bed, staring at the screen. His chest beat too fast for sleep. He typed and deleted his reply 3 times before finally writing, "Count me in." Then he turned off the light, rolled onto his back, and whispered to himself, I thought I was just getting promoted, not propositioned. And somewhere in the night, between intention and desire, the line blurred, but it had already begun. The first time Ryan saw the shift, it came not in a word, but in an emoji. A half smile, sent after midnight, beneath a feedback note about his latest draft. You really know how to make words behave, winking face. It was small, but from Isabel, everything small was deliberate. Every gesture, every pause, a studied move from a woman who had lived her life wielding power like a scalpel, precise, silent, effective. After that, her messages began to stretch beyond their supposed scope. What would you write if no one was watching? She asked one Tuesday night. Some people just look better in secrets. Came another, after he sent her a concept too daring for publication. It wasn't just flirtation, it was seduction through ambiguity, through the tension of maybe. There were no rules anymore. Only innuendo. The work, once sharp and structured, had become the veil beneath something else entirely. They talked about copy lines. Then cocktails. They exchanged edits. Then anecdotes. Then dreams. Then nights. Ryan found himself typing back with less caution, more charm. He added double meanings to sentences. And when she replied with, "I see what you did there," he felt a jolt of adrenaline. Not unlike applause. He had always used words to be clever. But with Isabel, it felt like he was using them to be seen. Really seen. On the night of Sebastian Wu's birthday, the magazine's eccentric, camera-obsessed fashion photographer, the line vanished completely. The party was a curated mess of Denver's most image-conscious creatives, stylists with sleeves of tattoos, influencers in rhinestone boots, editors in silk. The air smelled like champagne and eucalyptus oil. Isabel arrived late, in a backless ivory dress that made the room seem too bright. She greeted everyone the way she edited, precisely, sparingly, but when she saw Ryan, her eyes didn't scan, they settled. They ended up side by side on a velvet couch in the corner, half shielded by a potted fig tree. Conversation meandered from campaign trends to favorite novels to songs that make you feel nostalgic for things that never happened. Her hand touched his knee once. Accidentally. Then again, not accidentally. Her laugh curved at the edges. Her eyes lingered longer with each sip. As the party thinned, she stood and whispered, "I left my scarf in the upstairs lounge. Would you mind?" He followed her. The lounge was quiet, lit by one wall sconce and the orange pulse of the city below. She walked in first. He closed the door, and she turned. They didn't speak. The kiss was inevitable, like something written long ago and left in drafts. She pressed her body to his, fingers behind his neck, mouth tasting of dark berries and defiance. There was nothing tentative in her, no second guessing, only possession. And Ryan, for all his cleverness with language, found no words. It happened fast, but not rushed, a blur, but not a mistake. Clothes shifted, breath quickened, time folded. They found privacy on the designer chaise in the far corner. Her laugh low in his ear, her heels still on. It felt like a scene from a story he would have written but never dared live. Afterward, she adjusted her dress, looking at him with something between satisfaction and softness. "You don't have to explain," she said, smoothing her hair. "I just needed to feel chosen." He nodded, unsure what to say. She touched his chest, right over the heartbeat. "You make me feel like I still matter." And with that, she slipped out of the room. Ryan sat alone for a long minute. Shirt open, tie loose, reality slowly crawling back in. A part of him felt triumphant. He'd been seen, desired by the woman everyone feared and admired. He had crossed into a secret place. But another part of him, quieter, older, whispered that something was off. That maybe he hadn't been let in. Maybe he'd been positioned. And then came the buzz of his phone. A message from Isabel. "Don't overthink tonight. Just know I'll remember the way you looked at me more than anything you'll ever write." Still, when he left the lounge, he didn't look back, because in that moment, desire felt louder than doubt. Validation is a dangerous drug. And Isabel knew the dose. And for a man who lived in words, the silence that followed felt almost earned. But it had already begun. And the next line in the story would not be his to write. The apartment Isabel chose wasn't far from the office. It was tucked inside a building that pretended to be discreet. But Ryan could tell it was the kind of place where secrets were kept by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows, blackout blinds, and a minimalist interior that smelled faintly of vetiver and espresso. She told him it belonged to an old assistant. Now, on sabbatical, he didn't ask. They met there twice the first week, then 4 times the second. At first, it was about work, always work, a cover story to ease the weight of what they were doing. Isabel would bring proofs from photo shoots, early drafts of campaigns, mock-ups that just needed a second eye. Ryan felt flattered to be trusted. Needed. He told himself he was helping, that their connection made the work better. But soon, It became less about edits and more about proximity. She'd call it creative calibration. He'd show up, heart skipping, not knowing whether he was there to proof a tagline or kiss her against the kitchen island. One evening, she handed him a shirt. Navy blue, slim cut, silk blend. "You should wear this for your headshot," she said. "It brings out your eyes." He laughed, but she didn't. "I mean it," she added, placing her hand lightly on his chest. "Perception is half the game in this world. People believe what we show them." Later that night, she took a photo of him by the window. The city lights painted amber shapes across his face. She adjusted his collar, tousled his hair slightly, then framed the shot. "LinkedIn will eat this up," she murmured, but Ryan noticed she saved it not to his email, but to a folder on her device. He didn't ask. Again. By week 3, Ryan was slipping at work. He missed a copy deadline, misattributed a quote in a product launch. Isabel smoothed it over with editorial. She always did. Her words were calm, confident. She made problems disappear with a glance. No one asked questions. Until someone did. A stylist named Amy, no older than 23 and painfully observant, caught Ryan in the break room. Her tone was friendly, but her words were a scalpel. "Just be careful," she said, sipping oat milk from a glass bottle. Isabel once mentored a guy from production. He ended up freelance blogging about streetwear in Oregon. Ryan laughed it off, a nervous, brittle sound, but the seed was planted. Later that night, he opened Isabel's laptop while she was in the shower. She had asked him to check a file for a campaign deck. He found it. Then he found something else. A folder, nested 3 layers deep. Strategy_photos_final.psd. Inside were images. Some were from their shoots. Others were not. Private photos. Him half-dressed, her looking straight into the camera. Expression unreadable. A few were clearly candid. Others had the polished light and angle of intentionality. His breath caught. When she returned, towel wrapped around her like a column of ivory. He didn't know how to begin. "You took pictures," he said, flat. She didn't flinch, just walked past him, opened the wine. "Sometimes," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "Insurance is the only way to stay safe." "From what?" She smiled, and that smile was worse than any answer. "You ask too many questions for someone who once wrote a whole campaign about trusting your instincts." That night, they didn't make love. They didn't even touch. Ryan left before midnight, the silence between them stretching like a taut wire. On his walk home, he kept seeing the folder name flash behind his eyes. Strategy, photos, final. He was no longer just being seen. He was being kept. And in a world of words, images were permanent. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had written this script long before he ever entered the frame. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked between client briefs and monthly performance reports. No sender name, just an anonymous string of characters. No message, only a subject line. "You should know what she keeps." Attached was a folder titled, "For Your Eyes Only." Inside were 12 images, not explicit, not even scandalous, if judged purely by composition, but intimate in the way only secrets can be. Ryan and Isabel in soft light. A hand brushing hair from a forehead. A laugh captured mid-tilt. One photo, Ryan buttoning his shirt. Isabel in the background adjusting her bra strap. Was time-stamped 2:13 a.m. Tuesday, 3 weeks prior. There were also chat screenshots. Cropped perfectly. A flirtatious joke from Ryan. A wink emoji. A line that read, "You make me forget there's a world outside your skin." There were no full conversations. Just fragments. Enough to tell a story. A story in which he was the aggressor. The manipulator. The younger man who crossed a line. By noon, a meeting had been called. He sat in the editorial boardroom. Its white walls suddenly clinical. Sterile. Across the table, Isabel sat in a high-necked black blouse. Hair pinned. Eyes unflinching. The editor-in-chief, her husband, flipped through a folder of printed screenshots. His voice never rose. "Did you feel coerced, Isabel?" She looked down, then up, Her voice was soft. I felt manipulated. Ryan is talented, charismatic. I thought it was mentorship. But it turned into something else. Ryan blinked. The air in the room thickened. He opened his mouth. Sir, Ryan, the editor-in-chief said, raising a hand. HR will speak to you separately. For now, we ask you to take administrative leave. With dignity. But the messages were mutual. The photos have been reviewed. A beat. And they paint a difficult picture. The meeting ended in under 7 minutes. By the time Ryan returned to his desk, his email access was revoked. His keycard no longer buzzed green. When he stepped into the elevator, 3 colleagues turned their eyes to their phones. He packed his things in silence. A week later, Isabel was announced to be on an extended leave of absence for personal health reasons. She was not fired, not even suspended, just repositioned. The whispers in the building swelled but never named names. Ryan was erased without mention, like a layout that didn't make the final print. No one defended him, no one asked questions, not even the ones who once laughed at his jokes in the break room. Who once pulled him into brainstorms. Who once toasted him at his first cover story. In the weeks that followed, Ryan tried to explain to a handful of contacts, friends in the industry, former professors. He sent them the full message threads. The photos in context. No one responded directly. He was no longer a rising voice. He was a liability. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the rereading. Going over every message, every look, every word he thought was mutual. Trying to find the moment when it stopped being real. He never found it, because in his mind, it had always felt real. But stories are about framing. And Isabel, she knew framing better than anyone. In the end, Ryan was left not with proof, but with doubt, with the echo of his own certainty collapsing inward. He had been chosen, yes, but not for who he was. Only for what he could be used for. The town Ryan moved to didn't have a skyline. It had a water tower, a bakery that closed on Wednesdays, and a bookstore that still rang purchases into a drawer register. No one recognized his face there. No one knew the scandal that had emptied his apartment in Denver in one evening. And that was exactly what he needed. He went by Mark now. Mark Withers, a name pulled from a cemetery stone he once walked past as a child. He got the job at the small publishing house not because of his portfolio, he hadn't shown it, but because he fixed a sentence in their marketing brochure during the interview. The hiring manager had smiled and said, "At least you care about words." That, Ryan thought, was all he had left. He edited gardening manuals, ghost-wrote bios for local business owners, once even proofed a romance novel about Amish cowboys. It paid little, but enough. He rented a studio apartment above the hardware store. The only window faced the back alley, where delivery trucks beeped and pigeons loitered. He didn't use social media, didn't take selfies. When someone complimented his writing style, he nodded and changed the subject. At night, he sometimes reached for the laptop, not to write, just to look at the blinking cursor, at the blankness. The idea of putting his name on something again felt indulgent, dangerous, almost arrogant. Who was he now to speak? He kept no photos, none of his old colleagues, none of Isabel, but he remembered the night she said, "You're wasted here." He hated that memory, because part of him still wanted to believe it. 3 months into the new job, he received an email, no sender, no body, just a subject line. "You wrote the story, I just gave it an ending." He stared at the screen, didn't breathe, then closed the laptop. He didn't delete the message, didn't respond, just unplugged the device and left it on the windowsill. That night, it snowed lightly, the alley turned white and silent. He sat at his desk, a yellow legal pad before him, pen uncapped. He wanted to write something, anything, but the page remained empty, because the words that once poured from him, that once felt like oxygen, now felt like fingerprints at a crime scene. Every sentence came with the fear of being misunderstood, misused, weaponized. He folded the page in half, then again, and again, until it was the size of a matchbox. He didn't throw it away. Just slipped it in the back of a drawer. The place where things went when you weren't sure if they were worth keeping. The next morning, he showed up to work early. Said nothing, did the edits, ate lunch alone. Somewhere in the back of his head, he kept hearing her voice. You make me feel like I still matter. But now he knew. What she meant was, you made me feel protected. Because in an affair built on power, passion is just the decoy. Truth is the first thing that dies. He looked at his reflection in the glass of the break room fridge. She said I was different. But I was just the one who didn't ask questions. And when you stop asking questions, you become the easiest thing to break. A man with a story he can never tell. Los Angeles shimmered like a false god, golden, elusive, and hungry for new blood. Aidan Murphy, 26, had arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases, a film degree, and the kind of hope that burns too hot to last. He wasn't naive, not entirely, but he still believed talent could open doors faster than favors. That hard work might speak louder than whispers. His first job in the City of Angels was at Crosslight Studios, a boutique production company tucked into a glass and marble building off Sunset Boulevard. The place reeked of quiet power, assistants in black, glass doors that muted every step, and espresso machines that cost more than his college tuition. He was hired as a production assistant on a streaming miniseries called Evening Empire, working directly under Julian Cross, the studio's founder and a man who made intimidation feel like an art form. Julian was tall, silver-haired, with a voice like broken gravel and a gaze that cut. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the air around him froze. Aidan admired him, and feared him, too. Everyone did. But then came Naomi. She didn't enter a room. She arrived, 5'10", tailored dresses, low heels, and a stillness that pulled attention the way fire pulls oxygen. Her voice was low, deliberate, the kind that left silences in its wake. Naomi Cross was Julian's wife, and the company's director of communications. Once a legendary PR strategist, her fingerprints were on half the industry's most iconic premieres. But in the last 2 years, she'd stepped back, citing creative burnout in a rare interview. Still, when she walked into a meeting, the room stood straighter. The first time Naomi noticed Aidan was during a Monday morning table read. Julian had asked for a line rewrite, brusquely. As always, Aidan, thinking no one would care what the assistant had to say, mumbled a suggestion. It was sharper, cleaner. It worked. Julian looked at him like he was a gnat. But Naomi glanced up, not smiling, just watching, measuring. After the meeting, she passed him in the hallway. Close enough for her perfume to linger. Bergamot. Maybe sandalwood, she murmured. You're not afraid to speak. That's rare here. Aidan smiled back. Too fast. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, she started dropping by the editing room while Aidan was logging dailies. Not often, just enough. She would lean against the doorway and ask, "Do you think that scene earned its third act twist? Or is it too manipulative to play a minor chord under that reveal?" He answered honestly, "Always." And she listened. The first message came on a Thursday night, 11:22 p.m. He had just microwaved leftover curry and was about to rewatch Heat for the 5th time. The notification blinked. Naomi Cross. If you're still awake, I'd love your opinion on a teaser cut. The Dropbox link is below. Don't hold back. He didn't. They exchanged 5 emails that night. Then 7 the next. The third night, she sent a clip and added, "Be honest. You see what others don't." That line clung to him. By week 2, they were texting. By week 3, the texts carried punctuation like curiosity. You ever wonder what people would make if they weren't scared of what it says about them? She never signed her name. The 4th week, after a production meeting ran late, Naomi stopped by the break room. Just the 2 of them. She watched him stir his coffee. "You know," she said, "Julian used to care. But somewhere along the way, ambition became armor. You don't wear that yet." He didn't know what to say. So he said nothing. She looked at him then, not through him, not around him, at him. The way only someone discontent with their current life looks at someone who reminds them of who they used to be. That night, he couldn't sleep, not because of lust, not yet, but because he felt seen, noticed, valued. He told himself she was just being kind. A mentor, maybe, a person who remembered what it was like to be young and uncertain. But some part of him, the part that had waited his whole life to be invited in, knew better. She wasn't just unlocking doors. She was building a hallway. And he was already walking down it. He didn't realize what that meant until 2 weeks later, when she asked if he wanted to review a teaser edit in her office. The room was dim, the door closed. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the laptop. She didn't move away, and that was when it began. At least, that's what he'd tell himself later. But the truth is, it began much earlier. It began the moment he smiled back in the hallway. It began the moment he didn't ask why a woman like her needed validation from a man like him. And when the collapse came, as all collapses do in LA, he would remember that. And whisper to himself, like a confession, I thought I was being mentored, not selected as ammunition. It started with emojis, a wink after a late-night comment about a scene edit, a smirking face after a joke he texted her about the lead actor's overly dramatic death scene, a laughing emoji when he called the studio's latest poster Oscar bait with abs. Nothing explicit, nothing that could be screenshotted and framed, but something in the air shifted, like the humidity before a storm. Like the sound a match makes just before it catches fire. Aidan noticed, but he didn't name it. Not yet. Naomi's texts grew more playful, more personal, not frequent, but always unexpected. 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday. 6:12 a.m. with a, couldn't sleep. This scene keeps bugging me. Then came the selfies. Not posed. Not seductive, but raw. Her in a hoodie, reading a script. Her legs curled under her in the back of a studio van. Her fingers holding a wine glass. Captioned, to surviving another production cycle. She wasn't flirting, she was inviting. Aidan responded with restraint, but the kind born not of virtue, but fear. Fear of getting it wrong. Of reading into something not there. Of being the kid who mistook a handshake for a hug. Then came the wrap party. Held in a minimalist rooftop bar in Silver Lake. Under strings of Edison bulbs and the faint scent of overpriced lavender cocktails. Everyone buzzed with the jittery relief of a production finally put to bed. Laughter ricocheted off exposed concrete. Champagne flowed like it had something to prove. Aidan wore a suit he rented. Naomi wore black silk. They mingled, separately, at first. Then she appeared beside him at the bar. You hate these things, don't you? He smiled. I'm just here for the free shrimp. She laughed, not a loud laugh, a real one. It startled him. I'm headed back into the postroom, she said, brushing a curl from her forehead. Just to watch the final cut one last time before we hand it off. You want to come? He hesitated, just for a second. Strictly professional, she added, unless you want it to be otherwise. He followed. The post suite was empty, dimly lit. The overhead fluorescence swapped for warm track lighting. Aidan stood behind her as the teaser played, his breath aligning with hers in the stillness. She reached for the mouse. Paused the screen. This cut, she said. Not turning around. Julian hates it. Aidan whispered. He hates everything the first time. She turned then, slowly, eyes unreadable, one hand still on the mouse. The other lifted, almost instinctively, to rest against his chest. Her fingers brushed the lapel of his jacket, then flattened, and just like that, he kissed her, not out of calculation, not out of ambition, out of want. It was a kiss that belonged in a movie, a slow burn exploding on cue. Her hand curled behind his neck, his fingers tangled in her hair. She tasted like gin and something darker. Her mouth moved with precision, practiced but not indifferent. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she didn't smile, she looked serious, studying him. Then she said, softly, he cheated first. I'm just making the sequel better. They didn't make it out of the parking garage. Her SUV was parked in a dark corner. Windows tinted, leather interior still warm from the LA air. She climbed into the back seat, pulled him with her. It was clumsy, urgent, full of need that felt borrowed from another lifetime. She whispered his name like it was a password. He didn't ask who she was remembering when she closed her eyes. After, she rested her head on his chest and murmured, "You're the only one who still makes me feel watched." Aidan stared at the roof of the car, breath slowing. The guilt didn't hit until the morning. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a mistake, a moment fueled by alcohol and adrenaline. But then she texted, "I didn't regret it. Not even for a second." And he didn't either. What he did feel was something worse than guilt. He felt wanted. No one had ever looked at him the way Naomi did. Like he mattered, like he could burn the whole system down and she'd still choose him from the ashes. He didn't question why that was dangerous. Not yet. Because the story he'd been telling himself his whole life, the one where being good, being smart, being useful would be enough, was starting to fade. And in its place, a new story was being written. One where he was chosen. One where he was seen. One where he forgot to ask why. The apartment was in Culver City, discreet and sterile, with minimalist furniture and no family photos. The lease was under the name of an assistant Naomi once called the most forgettable woman in PR, a detail that struck Aidan only in hindsight. They met there every Thursday at 7:15 p.m. Right after Naomi's Pilates class and just before Aidan's pretend screenplay workshop. The windows were always closed. The lighting always dim. The rules unspoken but understood. Phones silent. No overnight stays. No talk about Julian, but everything else, fair game. Naomi brought wine, always French. Always dry. Aidan brought his half-finished screenplays. The ones he used to hide in a folder marked "Drafts to Forget." She read them in her robe. Legs folded like origami, eyes darting across the screen with the precision of a scalpel. "You write like you're angry," she said once. "Maybe I am. Good. The ones who play nice get silenced. The angry ones write history." And then she kissed him. Aidan started showing up late to staff meetings. He missed a deadline for the season 2 pitch deck. But Naomi covered for him. She always had a reason. "He's researching a segment for the new PR rollout," or "I assigned him to a sensitive task." No one questioned her. Why would they? Naomi Cross didn't make mistakes. She orchestrated. One morning, a delivery arrived for Aidan at the studio reception. Inside the box, a charcoal gray Italian wool blazer, a vintage watch, and a handwritten note that read, "Wear these when they finally let you speak on stage." His breath caught. He hadn't told her about his recurring dream, the one where he was accepting an award, thanking people who never thought he could get there. The next day, she gave him 2 VIP passes to a red carpet screening. "Walk in with someone else," she warned, "but wear the suit. I want the cameras to see you." He did. That night, he lay in her apartment while she flipped through his notes. She wore his t-shirt, her perfume still lingering in the fibers. Aidan reached for her, wanting comfort, clarity, something, but Naomi pulled away gently. "You know," she murmured, eyes still on the page. "Visibility is currency in this town." He laughed. "You make me visible." She didn't respond. Later that week, a senior cinematographer, Eli, a man whose voice sounded like a director's chair folding, cornered Aidan during a set break. "Word of advice," Eli said, lowering his coffee, "be careful, you're not the first she's made visible." "What's that supposed to mean?" Eli shrugged. "Just that flashbulbs burn fast. And some lights, they're meant to blind, not illuminate." That night, Aidan couldn't sleep. He opened Naomi's laptop. She'd left it open to review a sizzle reel. An idle click opened the file tree. One folder stood out, emotional tone references. Inside, dozens of images, behind-the-scenes stills, mood boards, a few candid red carpet shots. And in the middle, a series of photos. Him, and her, laughing on the couch, him shirtless in bed, turned away from the lens, her hand on his chest. The file names were innocuous, reference _1A, color temp test 3, but they weren't. His throat tightened. He didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to ask, but he did. Naomi, he said the next morning. Why are there photos of us filed with press material? She didn't flinch, just tilted her head and smiled, calm, knowing, almost maternal. In this town, she said, if you're not holding the story, you are the story. He stared. You think Julian hasn't done worse? You think I don't know where the bodies are buried? I'm just making sure no one rewrites my chapter without my input. Aidan stepped back. So this, all of this, was part of your plan? Her voice softened. No, Aidan, you were just the part that made it feel human. It hit him then, the unbearable weight of context. He wasn't her co-star, he was her proof. And somewhere deep inside, the part of him that once believed in fate and film and being chosen started to fray. Because maybe Eli was right. Maybe he was never lit up. Maybe he was just burned. The leak didn't come with fireworks. It arrived like a whisper in a theater, too soft to catch until the lights were up and everyone was staring. An anonymous email landed in Julian Cross's inbox on a gray Monday morning. No subject, no sender, just a zipped folder with the sterile label, redacted evidence. Inside, a cold, clinical sequence of files, date-stamped images of Naomi entering the Culver City apartment, security camera footage of Aidan following 20 minutes later, head lowered, baseball cap pulled low, a grainy screen grab from an editing suite, Aidan kissing Naomi. Her hands resting on his neck. No nudity, nothing overtly sexual, but the images didn't need to be graphic to scream betrayal. Intimacy, in this context, was a weapon. And then came the audio. A shaky, clearly doctored voice memo. Naomi's voice, fragmented, yet devastating. He said I made him feel seen. I didn't know how to say no. He kept pushing. Edited, spliced, intentional. Julian didn't scream. He didn't confront. He strategized. Filed a PR directive. Contacted legal. Called in favors with publicists and crisis consultants. By Thursday, the studio lot, usually abuzz with the fever dream of fiction, was drowning in something far stickier, real scandal. The media advisory read, Director Julian Cross responds to personal and professional betrayal. The press conference was held in the company's theater room. Velvet curtains, rows of velvet chairs, cameras aimed like rifles. Julian stood alone at the podium. Face grave, suit sharp, voice a shade too calm. In this industry, he began, trust is more valuable than talent. And today, I come before you not as a director, but as a man betrayed. Then came the bombshell. Aidan Hale, a junior production assistant, engaged in a sustained manipulation of my wife and colleague, Naomi Cross. This was not a relationship. It was coercion. Gasps cut through the room like scissors through silk. Cameras flashed. Microphones surged forward. Julian continued, tone unwavering. We have documentation suggesting emotional blackmail, exploitation of power, a calculated breach of both marital and professional trust. He played the audio. The room turned. Reporters scribbled. Some shook their heads. Others just watched with thinly veiled awe. A real-life scandal unfolding like a movie. Naomi issued a statement through her publicist within the hour. I was lost. He saw that. He used it. 16 words. Surgical, sympathetic, legal proof. She gave no interviews, no comment beyond that single line. No attempt to clarify, or to correct. Aidan, meanwhile, was already being escorted from the studio lot by 2 security officers. His ID badge stopped working. His company email account was deactivated. His parking privileges revoked. An HR email followed. Effective immediately. Your contract has been terminated. You are not to return to the premises. There was no discussion, no appeals process, just silence, and a growing sense of erasure. Over the next 72 hours, his name was removed from every digital asset. His contributions to recent projects were quietly reassigned. Credit lines were edited, IMDb entries modified. Even his email signature, the one he had obsessed over, was gone from every archived thread. Then the internet woke up. Twitter trended with #StudioSnake. Reddit threads ballooned with theories. Anonymous accounts posted screenshots, some genuine, others grotesque forgeries. Even Aiden's old college YouTube videos were unearthed and dissected. A tabloid ran with the headline, "Director's wife seduced by ambitious assistant," or was it the other way around? His phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications, messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some curious, some cruel. He texted Naomi, no response. He called, straight to voicemail. He went to the Culver City apartment. The blinds were drawn. The buzzer now listed a different name. No sign of her, no trace of what had been theirs. Naomi had vanished, airbrushed from the frame, just like she'd once done with countless marketing campaigns. But she had done it to her own life. And to his. The worst part wasn't the job loss, though it stung, or the online attacks, though they cut deep. It was the ambiguity, the emotional whiplash of not knowing. Had she ever cared? Had anything between them been real? He replayed old conversations in his head. Her hands in his hair. Her voice whispering about betrayal, passion, revenge. Had he been the weapon, or just collateral? He checked into a motel off the 101, one with buzzing lights and sheets that smelled like bleach. The TV flickered static. He didn't turn it off. He lay there in the dark, thoughts circling like vultures. Did I matter? Was I loved? Or was I just the plot twist? By sunrise, his name was no longer trending. But the damage had already been written in ink. The camera had moved on. The spotlight had dimmed. And somewhere in the margins of someone else's screenplay, he'd already been forgotten. The world didn't end for Aiden. It just shrank. From studio lots buzzing with caffeine and camera rigs to a narrow alley behind an indie production house in Koreatown. His new workspace reeked of burnt cable, expired ambition, and silent judgment. He was a field assistant again. No more producer credits. No whispered praise in the editing bay. No late-night brainstorms where ideas danced like fireworks. Just cables to coil, coffee to fetch, errands to run. His badge was plastic, his name fake, and his place in the credits nowhere to be found. His new name, Eli Ward, was borrowed from a dead uncle and made official by a DMV clerk too bored to ask questions. It suited him, anonymous, discardable. His apartment was a crumbling two-bedroom shared with three aspiring somethings who existed like ghosts, no greetings. No good nights, only notes scrawled in ketchup on fridge doors and unspoken rules about noise after midnight. His meals were what the city allowed, instant ramen, stale bagels from craft services, and once, half a sandwich an actress left behind during a shoot. He told himself it was temporary. That was 2 months ago. He didn't write anymore. At first, it was practical. No one wanted stories from a scandal. But it became something deeper, like a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. He would sit, pen in hand, a sentence blooming in his mind, then wilting before ink touched paper. Some nights, he'd walk to Griffith Park and watch the skyline. The Hollywood sign used to pulse with promise. Now it looked like a warning label. Then, without preamble, came the email. No sender, no greeting, just a subject line. He saw the betrayal. You only saw the bed. Aiden stared at it for hours. He knew who it was from. Not Julian. He wouldn't be so poetic. Not Naomi, at least not directly. But someone who knew, someone who still cared enough to remind him what he was, not a victim. Not a partner, just the plot device. He deleted the message, emptied the trash, closed the laptop, but it lingered in him like an infection that didn't scar the skin, only the soul. Weeks passed. On set, Aiden stood just off camera during a love scene between two actors with symmetrical faces and empty eyes. The director yelled, "Reset," 5 times. By the 6th, something fractured in him. It wasn't the acting, it was the way the male lead looked at his co-star, an almost reverent hunger. It was the same look Naomi once gave him in that dimly lit editing suite. Back when he thought he was special, when he thought he was hers. Admiration, manipulation, he could no longer tell the difference. He walked off set. No one noticed. That night, He pulled a forgotten notebook from under his mattress. The leather cover was creased, worn, ghosted with the scent of Naomi's perfume. A scent that lingered in fibers, in memories, in marrow. He turned to the last page he'd written. Blank. He stared at it, picked up a pen. Nothing came, no rage, no insight, no poetry, just the silent certainty of emptiness. He turned the page, another blank, and another. He felt like a book that had once promised everything, and delivered silence. He closed the notebook, stared at the wall. The voices came not from outside, but within, quote fragments, floating like wreckage from a shipwrecked dream. She said I was her revenge, but I became the one punished for both. In Hollywood, everyone plays someone. I just didn't know. I was cast as the fall guy. She looked at me like a script she already knew the ending to. I was just the punctuation. The next morning, he returned to set, held boom poles, sorted extension cords, ate silence for lunch. The assistant director asked him to stay late. He nodded, no hesitation, no questions. He was still in the story, just not as the hero. Maybe he never had been. Leo hadn't expected the quiet to be so loud. The Austin showroom glowed under morning light, a temple of curated silence broken only by the soft clicks of designer shoes against stone floors. Clean lines, glass dividers, the scent of cedar oil and espresso. It wasn't just an office. It was a performance stage. And everyone inside knew their roles. Leo, 28, stepped into this theater with a rolled-up portfolio and a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A scholarship kid from Waco, raised among chip tiles and discount lighting catalogs. He had clawed his way here. The firm didn't just design spaces. It curated desire, and now, he was part of it. His boss, Paul Greystone, was everything Leo had read about. 60-ish, silver hair, sharp suits, eyes like cold steel. He didn't smile. He approved. Leo had seen him for 5 minutes in the lobby on day one and hadn't since. But Vivian Greystone was something else entirely. She was the quiet force in the background, the voice in the brand's video reels, the signature on the oldest plans. 50, maybe older, but age clung to her like perfume. Intentional, expensive, layered. Her hair was always pinned back like she had just stepped away from a Vogue editorial meeting. Her voice was low, textured like velvet against a cracked speaker. Most days, she watched from the far corner of the presentation room, fingers steepled under her chin, not judging, witnessing. The first time she spoke to Leo was after a Monday design sprint. He had stayed late adjusting the lighting scheme for a minimalist villa in Marfa. The others left at 7. He stayed till 10. As he packed up, she appeared at the doorway, holding her coat. "You see light like it's a living thing," she said. Leo flushed. It was just a hunch. The client wanted something ambient. Ambient is what people say when they don't understand intimacy, she replied, then left without saying goodnight. That week, he found a handwritten note clipped to his sketchpad. "Don't compromise the hallway shadows. They are the story." She had signed it with just a V. The texts began after their third meeting. At 10:45 p.m. His phone buzzed. "Can't sleep. Still thinking about your lighting concept. Mind if we talk?" He hesitated. "Of course," he typed back. "Anytime." What followed were 20 minutes of voice notes. Vivian walking through a memory of her first Paris showroom, recalling how a misplaced chandelier had altered a marriage proposal. She asked Leo what music he listened to while drawing. She laughed, a soft, low thing that made the silence around him feel suddenly too intimate. Leo didn't tell anyone. It didn't feel wrong, not yet. It felt like mentorship, like being chosen. But it didn't stop. She began joining him during late nights. Once, he found her already in the meeting room, barefoot, sipping tea, flipping through his sketches. "You think in curves," she said. "Most men think in corners." Leo didn't know what to say. So he smiled. She didn't smile back. "That's good," she added. "You're not performing, yet." There was a tension Leo couldn't name. Not sexual, not yet, but charged. She complimented his instincts, his restraint. She said he reminded her of herself before she learned to keep her thoughts behind her teeth. He started staying later. One night, she asked him why he wanted to design. He shrugged. Because spaces hold stories, and I never got to own any growing up. I want to shape one. Just once. That feels like home. She tilted her head. That's the saddest reason I've ever heard. And the most honest. Another night, he asked why she stayed married to a man who seemed allergic to conversation. She looked at him for a long time before answering. Because marriage isn't about conversation. It's about image. And I like our image. Leo laughed nervously. Don't romanticize me, Leo, she added. It'll make what comes next harder. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't ask. Because deep down, he liked it. The ambiguity, the pull. He was smart enough to sense danger but young enough to believe he could handle it. That he was different. That she saw him. At home, he started dreaming about textures and her voice. He redrew old layouts just to test the lighting she mentioned. He replayed her laugh in his mind. Then one night, as he opened her latest message, the thought came uninvited. I thought I was just helping her feel heard. I didn't know she was about to rewrite my silence. The shift began subtly. What started as messages about design briefs or concept boards gradually turned into something warmer. More fluid. An emoji here. A smile with a wink. A sentence without punctuation that read like a whisper. Some things feel too beautiful to be work. Leo, still unsure whether to read too much into it, started rereading them late at night. He'd hold the phone over his chest, eyes squinting at the soft glow, wondering if the ellipses she left were stylistic or invitations. Vivian had begun sending photos of fabric swatches laid across her wrist. Captioned, "Do you think this tone flatters me?" Or a quick snapshot of an old film she was watching. "Wish you were here to discuss the lighting." He replied, carefully, measured, always just enough warmth to show appreciation, never enough to be accused of intention. And yet, in his chest, something bloomed, a feeling he tried to label as admiration, then respect, but which was slowly crawling into more dangerous territory. The night of the showroom launch. Everything tipped. The space glowed in golds and creams. Hanging installations caught the light just right. Paul had already left. A call from the overseas investors pulling him away before the toast. Vivian stayed. As expected, she always stayed late, claiming perfection came after the applause. "Can you help me test the final dimming sequence?" she asked Leo. As the last designer zipped up her laptop and left, they stood together, just the two of them, beneath a chandelier Leo had helped customize. As the lights dimmed in cascading pulses, Vivian stepped closer, the silence filled with the hum of hidden speakers and the scent of wood polish. "When I was your age," she began, softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "I used to believe every choice I made would lead to something solid. Something with my name on it." Then Paul happened. Leo didn't interrupt, he simply listened, the way he always had when clients shared their memories tied to a room or a texture. He has a gift, convincing people that their vision was his idea. At first, it was flattering, then it just became suffocating. She turned, the gold flecks in her eyes flickered in the dim light. "But you, Leo, you see things without owning them. That's rare." Her fingers brushed his. He flinched, not because he didn't want it, because he did. When she leaned in, her breath carried hints of lavender and gin. The kiss was slow, searching, like opening a drawer full of forgotten letters. They didn't speak as they moved down the corridor, past the gallery space and into the storage room. The motion sensor lights flickered to life, illuminating stacks of fabric rolls, tiles, slabs of marble. There, on an unused drafting table, surrounded by textures and silent witnesses of design, they undressed each other in silence. Vivian didn't whisper sweet nothings. She didn't promise. She didn't explain. Afterward, she lay back, one arm draped over her eyes, the other trailing fingers over the carved wood beside her. "You make me feel like I'm still being watched, not archived." Leo didn't know what to say. He sat on the edge of the table, heart hammering. It wasn't lust that filled him. It was something heavier, a sensation of being tangled in a narrative he hadn't written but desperately wanted to believe he belonged in. On the drive home, he kept recalling her sighs, her silence, not passionate, not joyful, but full of something raw, unhealed. He thought about texting her. He didn't. He lay in bed, watching shadows move across his ceiling, and wondered, if it was wrong, why did her loneliness sound exactly like mine? The penthouse was tucked away on the top floor of a newly refurbished high-rise near Lady Bird Lake. Listed under a shell corporation tied to Vivian's PR agency. It wasn't ostentatious, not by Austen standards, but it was curated, a blend of postmodern lines and mid-century tones. Filled with rare books and hand-woven rugs. Everything looked like it had a purpose. Just like her, she never called it a meeting, only a creative session, a light edit review, or a quick space feedback loop. But Leo knew. He knew when he'd press the elevator button that he wouldn't be reviewing renderings. He would find her barefoot. Always. Glass of white wine in hand. Jazz humming low from unseen speakers. She never asked if he wanted a drink. She simply handed him one. Then she sat, legs folded under her on a suede sectional, and gestured for him to sit closer. Always closer. You're tense, she murmured once, fingers brushing his collar. Deadlines, or something more existential. He had laughed, awkwardly, but her touch stayed long after she pulled away. As the weeks passed, Leo missed a deadline for a commercial lobby project, his first since joining the firm. He blamed a vendor, then a second delay happened. On a client pitch deck he was supposed to finalize. Vivian called the client herself, smoothed it over, then later sent him a message. We all wobble. Visionaries trip more often. She gifted him a vintage Omega Seamaster the next week. It came in a satin-lined box with a note tucked inside. Every man who's going places needs to remember where he came from. Leo wore it to the office once. Paul noticed. Nice watch. The director commented. Gaze unreadable. Leo mumbled something about an uncle's estate. Vivian had taught him that. Never lie. Just redirect. One afternoon, as Leo was leaving a shoot location, a senior architect, Marla, leaned close as they packed up samples. You know Evan wore one just like that, she said, too casually, before he left for Nebraska. Restores barns now, no Wi-Fi, just lumber and regrets. Leo tried to laugh. It came out dry. He went home and searched Evan plus Vivian plus architectural firm, but found nothing. Scrubbed, sanitized. He told himself it was coincidence. That Vivian's fondness for young talent was professional. That maybe she saw something in him others didn't. Then he stumbled upon the folder. They were in the penthouse. Supposed to be reviewing mood boards for a new desert retreat concept. Vivian handed him her tablet, asking him to scroll through samples. But he swiped one layer too deep. A folder titled, Youth, PR Notes. He hesitated, tapped. Inside were images, dozens, of him, not candid workplace shots, but stolen glances, him looking over samples, laughing at something she said, sipping wine in half-light. One was of him shirtless, taken during one of their post-meeting cool-downs. You keep files on me? He asked, voice low. She didn't flinch. This town eats youth, she said, taking the tablet from him. I just wanted to taste it first. Her smile was gentle, like she'd offered him poetry. That night, Leo couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, realizing how few of his decisions had been his. How every step, every misspoken deadline, every glass of wine, every gift, had led him deeper into something shaped not by affection, but by narrative. He was the narrative. He had been designed into a subplot, framed within a comeback arc for a woman who once ruled PR headlines. Now she needed youth, relevance, heat, and he had given her all three. In the reflection of his bedroom mirror, the Omega shimmered, a ticking symbol of something he no longer understood. He turned it over, looked for a scratch, a mark, anything that made it his. Nothing, just silence. I was designing interiors, he whispered to the dark. but I didn't see the walls closing in. The jazz from the penthouse still echoed in his ears. Not a melody, a warning. The email came at 6:14 a.m., a time Leo typically reserved for silence, coffee, and a short run before work. The subject line read only, "Status update." No greeting, no signature, just one line of body text. "Your services are no longer required." It was from Paul. Leo read it 3 times, expecting some context, some elaboration, even a typo, but it was as clinical as it was conclusive. He replied once, "Is this regarding a specific project?" No answer ever came. By 9 a.m., his company login was invalid. By 10 o'clock, security had escorted him out of the building. No explanations, no accusations, just protocol, the kind reserved for someone who had become expendable. He called Vivian, once, twice, voicemail. By lunchtime, she appeared on a live stream from the Austin Art and Interiors Expo. Standing beside Paul on a PR panel, they smiled, spoke about sustainability in luxury spaces. Their hands never touched, but the image was clear. Unity, continuity, legacy. Leo watched it on his phone in the parking lot. The next morning, he showed up at the office. Not with a plan, just with breath. He found her by the display panels near the lobby, speaking softly with a florist about seasonal stems. "Vivian." She turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable. Not cold, not kind, just composed. "Leo," she said as if his name were part of the inventory. "Can we talk?" She glanced at her watch. "I'm due in 5 minutes. But go ahead." He tried to find his voice. Why are you pretending none of it happened?" She blinked. "What exactly are you referring to?" He stepped closer. "Us." Vivian tilted her head slightly, almost as if studying a misaligned vase. "Leo, you're talented, you're bright, but I think you may have misread some of my gestures. I was generous, perhaps too much. You were young. It happens. It happened," he whispered, each syllable laced with disbelief. "You kissed me. You said." She raised a hand. "Please, let's not turn inspiration into accusation." The words knocked something loose in his chest. But worse than her dismissal was her complete detachment. As though he was a passing conversation, not a participant in anything real. He turned to leave. The receptionist, who used to greet him with warm eyes, now avoided his gaze. The young intern who once asked to shadow him now whispered to another assistant. And slowly, his name vanished from shortlist referrals, from project collaborations. Meetings he'd been invited to were rescheduled indefinitely. When he inquired, he was told, "We've moved in a different direction." No scandal, no outburst, just erasure. It was then Leo realized he hadn't been a lover. He'd been a campaign, a temporary narrative arc. Vivian hadn't broken rules. She'd reinvented herself and used him as texture. The kind that looks good in warm light and disappears when the room is redesigned. He went home that night to a studio apartment filled with sketches and unsent thank you notes. He opened one of his old notebooks, flipping past designs and lighting concepts. In the margins of a page was a quote he'd scribbled months ago. She said I gave her youth. But when I gave her my truth, she called it fantasy. It no longer felt poetic. It felt like a warning he had written to himself before he knew he'd need it. The wind carried the scent of cedar and dust. Leo wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and looked at the plank of walnut wood on the table. The grain ran wild and unpredictable, but beautiful. It reminded him of something he used to say in presentations, "Imperfection invites the eye." It had been 9 months since he'd last worn a collared shirt. 9 months since he'd heard the word bespoke used unironically. 9 months since he'd stepped into a showroom and seen his designs appropriated by someone with a more established name. Now, he spent his days carving by hand, joining tables and bedframes, occasionally a chair. His tools didn't come from Italy or Scandinavia. They came from a local flea market, and he sharpened them himself. The workshop was a repurposed barn in the outskirts of Bastrop, Texas, where he shared space with 2 other craftsmen who spoke little and laughed often. They never asked what brought him here. And he never offered. In the silence of sandpaper strokes, Leo found something resembling healing. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the slow erasure of noise. He lived in a small studio above a feed store. The ceiling creaked, the plumbing whined, but he slept. He cooked simple meals and read old architecture books he found at yard sales. No Wi-Fi, no news. One Thursday, a couple walked into the workshop holding an old design board. The woman looked around 35. Bright eyes and high expectations. "We bought this from a liquidation sale downtown," she said. "Apparently it was never used. But we loved the look of it. Could you build something around this light study?" Leo looked at the foam board. The edges were frayed, the paper yellowing slightly, but he knew the sketch. The hand-rendered light coming in from the left, the subtle fade into the fabric bench below. It was his. It had been rejected in a creative meeting 2 years ago. Paul called it too poetic. Leo ran his finger along the drawn beam of sunlight. He didn't say a word. "Do you think it's workable?" the man asked. Leo nodded slowly. "Keep the lighting exactly like this," he said. "It speaks the truth better than most words." They thanked him and left. He stood in the doorway for a while, the board still in hand. That evening, he opened his notebook, not a laptop, just a stitched book with specks of sawdust in the creases. He wrote a letter he would never send. "Vivian, there was a time I thought visibility was the same as intimacy. That to be seen was to be loved. Thank you for correcting me. I don't hate you. You taught me how silence sounds when it comes from someone who once made you feel visible. I don't miss the city. I don't miss the spotlight. But sometimes I miss the way you watched me when I explained a design. Like it mattered, like I mattered. I know now, that wasn't love. It was hunger. Yours for time, mine for worth. And hunger makes everything taste like truth, until the ache stops. I'm building things that no one will post about. Things that creak, things that last. Be well, L." He tore out the page and slid it into the fire pit beside his workbench. The flame took its time, curling the edge slowly before swallowing the ink. He didn't watch it burn. He turned away and sanded a corner until it softened beneath his touch. Maybe that was the only real design he needed to finish. She wanted to feel young. He wanted to feel real. Maybe that's why they never lasted. Julian's first day at the digital content firm in Atlanta was quieter than expected. The office didn't hum with chatter or chaos the way he imagined a creative space might. Instead, it pulsed with precision. Everything was scheduled down to the minute. Cameras glided on tracks like silent sentinels. Meeting rooms glowed softly through frosted glass. It felt less like a startup and more like a production-ready set, always filming. Even if nothing was rolling. Julian adjusted his headphones, nodding as a senior tech explained the server sync protocols. But his eyes kept flicking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where a woman stood apart from the rest. Her heels didn't clack, they landed like exclamation points. Her bob-cut hair framed a face that had once commanded screens across the country, Tamara Quinn. Co-founder, former podcast host turned elusive head of creative strategy. She hadn't spoken during the morning brief, but when she moved, others shifted subtly to make space, as if her presence pressed against them. Julian had seen her before, of course. Clips of her show floated online, sharp, funny, fearless, but in person, she carried a different weight. Less fire, more gravity, like a fallen star that chose where it landed. He returned to his desk and began setting up his workstation. Dual monitors, waveform software, color grading presets. This was his world. Audio was memory to him, vibration, resonance, a kind of intimacy he could sculpt. He didn't need lights. He needed silence and the exact breath between words. By the end of the second week, he was in a rhythm. Early in, late out. His edits were tight, his instincts clean. Then came the Monday content review meeting. Rick, the founder, leaned back in his chair, fingers locked over his chest. Gruff, efficient, eyes like surveillance cameras. They were reviewing a new podcast promo, one Julian had re-edited over the weekend. instead of the usual 2-camera wide. He'd built the piece around tight handheld close-ups, eyes, hands, smirks. It was intimate, risky, but it breathed. When the clip ended, silence lingered. Then Tamara spoke. "Who cut this?" Julian hesitated, unsure if he should claim it. A senior producer pointed his way. Tamara didn't nod, she just studied him, long enough for others to glance between them. "It feels lived in," she said finally. "We need more of that." The meeting moved on, but Julian didn't. The rest of the day blurred, his ears replaying her phrase. That night, as he organized drive folders, a Slack ping appeared. "Tamara Q. Mind staying a few minutes after hours? Want to get your thoughts on an old storyboard. Nothing urgent, just curious." He stared at the message. It was innocuous, professional, but something about the "just curious" made him pause. She was waiting in the editing suite. Lights low, wall screens glowing. She handed him a tablet, an unreleased campaign storyboard from years ago. He scanned the panels. Tamara sat beside him, a little closer than protocol required. "This one never made it out. Rick thought it was too introspective," she said, air quoting the last word. Julian tapped a panel. "The framing here, it's ahead of its time." She smiled. "You see it, that's rare." There it was again, those eyes. Deep, searching, not flirtatious, but open, like she was peeling back a page of herself to see if he'd flinch. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about office politics, about story, voice, rhythm. At one point, she said, "The lens doesn't lie, but it edits. Remember that." Julian left that night with a strange charge in his chest, not adrenaline, not pride, something quieter, like being noticed for the first time in years. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. She'd invite him to look at old content, ask his take on framing choices, compliment his use of sound layering, always under the pretense of work, always within the lines, barely. She called him, the kid with clean cuts. He didn't mind. Her voice was velvet-laced with challenge. And her presence, so curated, so practiced, felt like a performance just for him. Julian began editing longer hours. Not because he had to. Because he hoped she'd walk in. Even when she didn't, he stayed. He stopped talking about work with his roommates. He stopped checking his dating apps. He started thinking about color temperature more than meals. One Friday evening, as they watched a rough cut together, Tamara leaned in and asked, "Do you think editors are just failed directors who learned to hide their vision behind other people's?" Julian answered without thinking, "No, I think they're surgeons. We cut to keep the story alive." She stared at him, not the way a boss looks at an employee, the way someone scans a painting they forgot they ever painted. When he left that night, the parking lot was empty. The air was thick, summer storm on the edge. He looked back once. Her office light was still on. As he drove home, his heart beat faster than it should have. And in the blur of taillights and rain starting to fall, he whispered to himself, "I thought she wanted my ideas. She really wanted the man who still believed in them." He didn't know it yet, but the story had already begun. And the camera, somewhere, was already rolling. The hours at the studio blurred into one another, late nights laced with coffee. The static hum of editing bays. And the occasional distant thud of a prop falling in the equipment room. It wasn't unusual for Julian to stay behind after hours, especially with deadlines mounting. But what changed wasn't the work. It was her presence. It started with the messages. They weren't overtly flirtatious at first. Tamara would send him clips with playful critiques. "Your transitions are smoother than Rick's apologies," she once joked. Another time, she sent an old behind-the-scenes photo from a shoot 10 years ago, her in a leather jacket, holding a boom mic and laughing mid-sentence. "Back when I thought I had to yell to be heard," she captioned. Julian replied with laughter, emojis, and the kind of reverence only a newcomer to the industry could still offer. His admiration was sincere, untainted by cynicism. Then came the voice note. It arrived at 1:42 a.m., wrapped in the quiet loneliness of the studio. He was adjusting levels on a trailer when he saw the alert, a 17-second voice message. "You're the first one who ever cut my breath the way I cut scripts." He replayed it 3 times. There was no background noise. Just her voice, husky, deliberate, and trembling at the edges, like a tightrope stretched just past its limits. The next day, she said nothing about it. Nor did he. 2 nights later, they were the last ones left in the editing suite. The team had gone home after finalizing the campaign's hero cut, but Tamara had asked Julian to stay and review a different version she was toying with. The lights were dimmed to save power. The screen cast a cool blue glow that danced across her cheekbones as she leaned forward. Tracing the arc of a cut with her finger, Julian leaned in too, his eyes on the footage, until he felt it, her hand, light, hesitant, pressing against the small of his back. He didn't move, and when he turned to her, she didn't smile, she just looked. The kiss was sudden but not rushed. Neither of them gasped. It was slow, deliberate, like pulling an old reel from the archive and threading it through a machine-long idol. There was no whisper of names, no desperate undressing, only hands, quiet, curious, undeniable. They left the suite hand in hand, the silence between them humming louder than the overhead buzz. The design studio was dark but unlocked. They slipped inside, past faux marble pillars and green screen curtains. Between crates of lighting gels and boxes of audio rigs, they found space, on a velvet staging couch used in interviews. She took control, not with force, but with certainty, as if she had done this before, many times, with many versions of the same young man. Julian didn't ask, he just followed. Later, he lay on the couch, heart racing, while Tamara ran her fingers across the stitches in the fabric. Saying nothing, she dressed slowly, pulling on her shirt as if easing out of a costume. When she finally looked at him, it was with a glint of something unreadable. Not regret, not affection, something in between. "Don't ask what this is," she said, "just let it be the reel that runs before the movie." Julian tried to laugh. He didn't succeed. The next morning, walking into the studio felt different. He wasn't an intern anymore. Not just a technician. He was something else, something undefined. Something that came with privilege. Or consequences. His fingers hesitated over the playback button on his console. For the first time in months, he questioned whether what he was building was a career, or a trap. But the messages kept coming. Shorter now, more ambiguous. Photos of empty chairs, her voice singing one line of a jazz standard, random quotes from old noir films. Julian felt chosen, but somewhere, just out of frame, a lens had already started recording. He just didn't know it yet. "We pressed record, but I didn't know she was the one filming." The first time Tamara asked Julian to meet her at the studio loft. It sounded almost casual. "It's where we archive old tapes and audio reels. A bit dusty, but perfect when you want silence that doesn't feel empty." Julian arrived with a hard drive and a notebook, expecting to digitize old files. Instead, he walked into a space that felt lived in, not dusty, but curated. Velvet blackout curtains, polished walnut desks, a minibar in the corner. The lights dimmed amber, like a scene meant for a late-night monologue. The faint hum of an old amplifier buzzed in the air. Tamara was barefoot, curled on a low couch with her laptop balanced on one thigh. "Come in, just working on the sizzle reel." That was the beginning. They started meeting there weekly, then twice a week. The place became their sanctuary from the corporate timelines, from Rick's looming presence, from the critical gaze of production meetings. They told themselves it was work. Always work. Tamara brought over a gift the second week. A top-of-the-line Loopdeck console. "You deserve tools that respond to your instincts." Julian was stunned. "This costs more than my rent." She smiled. "Consider it an investment in what you're becoming." It was followed by a camera gimbal, then a custom monitor, and finally, a proposal. When her private podcast network launched, he would be executive editor. Julian, once skeptical of flattery, started to believe it. No one had ever spoken of his potential so unapologetically. until the red light blinked. One evening, while adjusting color grading on a side monitor, Julian noticed it, a faint red glow above the main camera in the corner. It was subtle, almost hidden behind a potted plant. He pointed at it. "Is that recording?" Tamara turned, squinting, then laughed, too quickly. "Oh God, I probably left it on after a voice test. You know how many reels I leave running." He smiled weakly, but something in his spine tightened. Another week, he saw something stranger. Tamara was editing a trailer for a mockumentary pitch. On the preview monitor, for just a second, Julian saw a freeze frame, his back, shirtless, in the studio. He didn't speak, just waited. She noticed. "This is a world where people steal stories." "Julian," she said calmly, "I just document mine before anyone else can rewrite them." He wanted to believe her, desperately, but that night, as he watched her mouth shape his name in an old recording, he wondered whether this was preservation, or control. Around the office, whispers started, not loud, but sharp. "She's grooming him. Another intern bitten by the queen. Wait till Rick finds out." Julian confronted none of it. But during a late shift, an old sound engineer paused beside his desk. "Be careful," the man said, voice low. "You're not the first who thought he mattered." Julian barely blinked. What happened to the last one? The engineer's mouth pressed into a grim line. "He was brilliant. Now he writes captions for ASMR mukbangs." The walls of the studio, once a haven, began to sweat. Every cable, every lens, every static buzz now seemed to hum a quiet warning. Julian started checking the ceiling corners before undressing. He stopped keeping mementos, deleted voice notes she sent at 2 a.m., avoided eye contact during team reviews. But the hardest thing wasn't mistrust. It was mourning, because somewhere between Tamara's late-night calls and the morning lattes with his name spelled right, Julian had believed they were building something real, intimate. Now he wondered if that belief was the exact thing Tamara had needed from him. He stopped asking when the network would launch. She stopped mentioning it. She'd walk past him in the hallway now with a grin that meant nothing, or everything. He couldn't tell anymore. He walked into the studio one last time, hoping to catch her alone, to ask, what, exactly? Instead, he saw her adjusting her camera, alone, framed perfectly in a mirror. And in that stillness, it hit him. Maybe he wasn't in her story. He was just the footage. The lockout happened on a Tuesday morning. Julian arrived early, latte in hand, ready to finalize a sequence Tamara had marked as urgent the night before. But when he entered his login credentials, the access terminal returned a sterile message. "Access denied. Please contact your administrator." At first, he thought it was a tech glitch. Server downtime wasn't unusual, but when his ID badge failed to buzz him through the second-floor editor's suite, his stomach sank. A security guard appeared within minutes. Polite but firm. "Mr. Fields, I've been instructed to escort you to our." The walk felt longer than it should have. Every framed campaign along the corridor, clips he helped sharpen, soundbites he mastered, seemed to judge him. The air conditioning was unusually cold. At the end of the hallway sat Maria from Our, flanked by two others, both unfamiliar. "Julian," Maria began, her voice not unkind, but measured, clinical, "your access has been suspended. Pending an internal investigation." Investigation into what? She didn't answer. Instead, she slid a screen across the table and pressed play. It was the studio. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. The angle came from one of the ceiling cams, static, but all-seeing. It showed Julian and Tamara. The moment their bodies met. The moment her hand pulled him in. The moment he kissed her like it meant the beginning of something. There was no sound, until it cut to a second feed. This one had audio, muffled but unmistakable. Her sighs, his voice, her name. Julian turned away. "This was recorded without my consent," he said, voice brittle. "We're not here to debate legality," Maria said. "We're here to understand how it ended up synced to the company's training archive." He blinked. "What?" She nodded toward the second screen. A screen where the file name ended in softskulls_module3_final. He couldn't speak. He barely remembered leaving the room. Everything became blur, faces too still, steps too loud, eyes that didn't want to meet his. Later that afternoon, the company gathered in the small screening room for what was presented as an emergency cultural reset meeting. Tamara took the stage. She was immaculate, a neutral-toned suit, soft makeup, hair pinned back. Her voice, when it came, was a masterclass in balance, measured sorrow, quiet strength. I want to acknowledge a personal lapse, she said, a breach in judgment that has affected our shared space. Julian sat at the back. No one asked him to leave. No one acknowledged he was even there. There was an imbalance of power. Tamara continued, I was in a vulnerable place emotionally. Certain advances were made, and I lacked the clarity to stop them. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She didn't mention his name. Only when someone asked, a meek voice from the crowd, did she glance at the back of the room and say. He manipulated the dynamic. Julian's ears rang. He felt both burning and hollow. Rick came in as the meeting broke. He didn't walk over to Tamara. He didn't look at Julian. He merely paused by the door and said, just loud enough. We know what to do with broken data. By evening, Julian's inbox was inaccessible, his profile scrubbed from the company site. The footage, though supposedly secured, had already started circulating in private Discord groups and Slack threads. By morning, memes were being made. Someone replaced his LinkedIn headshot with a still frame from the video. A new nickname followed, Camera Boy. Job leads dried up. Recruiters stopped replying. Friends from the industry ghosted. Even those who had envied his rise now seemed oddly satisfied. Tamara released a Medium post, vague, poetic, self-reflective. It was shared widely, applauded. Julian read it alone, in a diner near the bus station, where no one knew his name. She filmed the pleasure, he took the blame, and the world clapped for her narrative. The house in Savannah was old, creaking, and wrapped in ivy. It belonged to Mason, an old college friend who now lived a quiet life restoring vintage bicycles and brewing his own beer. When Julian showed up at his door with a duffel bag and a silence that weighed more than words, Mason only nodded, stepped aside, and said, guest room's clean, no questions. Julian didn't say much for the first week. He woke early, ran long, came back drenched in sweat and regret, and buried himself in wedding footage. He had taken a freelance gig from a small bridal videography agency, editing memories he hadn't lived. Shaping joy from someone else's vows. It paid enough for food, for rent, for staying invisible. The room he worked in was dim, curtains always drawn, monitors casting soft flickers against his unshaven jaw. Some days he'd catch himself adjusting a frame, freezing on a bride's smile, then closing the window as if her joy was too loud. He didn't speak about Atlanta. He didn't mention Tamara, but in every paused frame, every slow dissolve, a shadow of her lingered. One afternoon, a young production assistant from the agency, Natalie, stopped by. She was bubbly, curious, 22 and still believed in the romance of cameras. She handed him a thumb drive and said, "Old footage, just make it flow." When she came back 3 days later to pick up the edit, she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching his screen. "You're good," she said, quietly, "like, really good. The way you framed that kiss in the mirror. That's not just editing, that's performance. You ever think about going back to big work?" Julian didn't turn. He clicked save, then quit the software. "Some stories look better from far away," he said. She lingered a second longer, maybe waiting for something deeper. But when none came, she smiled, took the drive, and left. That night, Julian sat alone with his laptop. The cursor blinked in a blank email window addressed to himself. No subject line. He began to type. "I thought we created something. But she only created proof. I thought we built a reel of us, fragments of feeling. Montage of nights that meant something. But maybe I was the B-roll. Maybe I was the placeholder until the next draft came along." He stared at it for a long time. then added one more line. You weren't her equal, you were her edit. He never clicked send. The weeks turned into months. Julian stopped dreaming about microphones and dolly tracks. His hands grew steadier, not on gimbals, but on wood, on splices of ribbon, on timelines that didn't need rewinding. He learned to live with soft focus. Sometimes, walking downtown, he'd see a poster of a podcast festival with Tamara's name still attached as a creative consultant. Her face smiled from glossy banners like nothing had broken, like she had kept every cut, every version of herself, perfectly stitched. He never tore them down. Instead, he went home, opened a fresh project, and trimmed a father-daughter dance to the swell of a piano. He watched their arms wrap around each other, the way forgiveness lived in silence. And in that silence, something loosened inside him. No revenge, no press. Just the echo of something once lit, now folded into the dark. The final line he wrote, on a sticky note, stuck to the edge of his monitor. She had a camera, I had a dream, only one of us kept the edit. And then he turned off the lights, and let it fade to black.